Good morning, everyone. Let's come to order. This is our February 12th meeting of our task force. Bob Miller is in Tallahassee testifying before the legislature, and someone else was not coming. I don't remember, but glad y'all are here. Carl Cannon was saying what a delight it is to get up in such a beautiful day and come down here and do such wonderful work. So we are doing wonderful work, and I want to thank each of y'all for your commitments. We're getting to hopefully the end. I'm hoping this week and next week will be our final meetings, except for maybe some editorial stuff. Today we'll focus on pension design, which is very important going forward. I've asked the Undersheriff, Dwayne Centerfit, is here to help give some insights. John Keene is starting a meeting and coming over, so he'll be coming in too. So hopefully we can really accomplish some things today. Most of y'all saw the editorial in the paper either yesterday or the day before that spoke about Tom Madonic's work. Excuse me. And Tom will be up before us in a minute. I want to prelude that by saying Wayne Ezell from the newspaper had sent over to us maybe 3 weeks ago, a copy of the video presentation that Tom had done at Stanford, which I hope all of y'all seen. Tom has updated that somewhat. And I called Tom and asked him if he'd be willing to come before us last week when we talked. And he said he would. He was going to refine it some and then speak to us. I've known Tom since we served on the Jacksonville Journey Committee together. He was one of those guys that you just saw. He had a keen, particularly financial mind, and was very helpful to the journey process. Tom, we welcome you, and we'd like to start our meeting. I told Tom that we had a tight time frame, but we wanted to fully discuss his suggestions, and so I've put 45 minutes on the agenda. In some ways hope it doesn't take that long, but I want Tom to know he's got all the time we need for both his presentation, questions from us, and then from the Undersheriff and from John also, and any others. So, Tom, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Again, my name is Tom Madonics, and it's my pleasure to present a reform plan for the Jacksonville Police and Fire Pension Fund. First, I wanted to offer gratitude to the task force for the invitation this morning. I've worked alongside many of you in guiding and building our city's institutions and on policy matters that shape the future of Jacksonville. And as Chairman Shai mentioned, we served together back on the Jacksonville Journey Initiative several years ago, back when I had significantly less gray hair. I do truly salute your efforts to date in this most pressing problem. And as the cliche goes, for those called to appointed public service like yours, the city ought to double all of your salaries. If you would have told me 4 months ago that I'd be here today speaking about pension reform, I would have questioned your sanity. I can assure you I've got a few things on my plate to keep me busy, but it's funny how life works out. I was sipping coffee on a Saturday, October morning, where I discovered and signed up for the first ever MOOC, or Massively Open Online Course, offered by the Stanford Graduate School of Business, one of the top business institutions on the globe. The course, The Finance of Retirement and Pensions, attracted over 44,000 participants from around the nation and world. And the course was taught by Professor Joshua Rao, who's an authority in the field of pension finance, and is recognized as being one of the most influential people in the nation shaping the future of U.S. pensions. The capstone project was to form a team and select a pension system, analyze it, and propose reform recommendations. So I led the formation of a team of 4 Jacksonville citizens from across the city. None of us knew each other. Before the project, we selected the Police and Fire Pension Fund, given its prominence in public discussion today, and using our recently acquired tools and knowledge, collected data, and got to work. So we're honored that our proposal was among the top 5 submissions from around the world. Hand-selected is having the most promising and innovative ideas to address the trillions of dollars in unfunded pension liabilities that are threatening the financial future of many U.S. state and local governments. And as part of the top 5, last month I had the privilege of presenting this plan before a panel of experts at the Stanford Business School, where I received a lot of great feedback from thought leaders in the field. So over these last few months, I've learned a lot, and it's my pleasure to share those insights with you today. So this reform proposal is humbly submitted. We consider it to be a working draft offered to the public to be chiseled and polished by our fellow Jacksonville citizens and other interested parties. This is version 1.0. We've received some feedback from leaders at Stanford and begun to receive it from citizens in our community as word of this proposal is spread. We aim to release version 2.0 in the next handful of weeks based on comments and insights we receive, including any emails. Set up an email address, jackspensionreform@yahoo.com, that any citizen could comment on. So if we made an error, let us know. If you have an insight that can sharpen your thinking, let us know. Perhaps I could sharpen yours today as well. Overall, it's our sincere hope that these insights and reforms can reposition and strengthen Jacksonville's financial future to move our city boldly forward. There we go. We believe the condition of the Jacksonville Police and Fire Pension Fund is the greatest threat to the short and long-term financial health of our city government and Jacksonville's future quality of life. The size and depth, of course, of the fund's challenges are daunting. Our $1.7 billion unfunded liability is almost twice the size of our general revenue fund and represents $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in the city. Today, $148 million, nearly 15% of our budget is allocated to the fund alone. This exceeds the combined budget for citywide public works, parks and rec, libraries, the Children's Commission, economic and downtown development, the Cultural Council, public service grants, and many other core public services listed here. Given the size and scope of the problem, citizens need to follow the pension system with the attention it demands, and it's our duty as citizens bearing a share in our city's responsibilities to form a clear opinion and make up our minds on what ought to be done. In this past decade, things have gone to bad to worse, as 10 years ago, allocations to the fund from taxpayers totaled $22 million. It grew to $81 million just 4 years ago, and again today it's $148 million. Most recently, the increased diverted monies to address the fund's liability resulted in the largest property tax increase in a generation. And as a result, Duval County property tax rates are now at its highest levels since 1991. Current examples like Detroit or Stockton, California, demonstrate a potential path ahead for Jacksonville if existing trends continue. And I believe that's one littered with higher taxes that suppress economic growth, or large cuts to city services, including public safety, or some combination of the two. Regardless, it makes Jacksonville a less desirable place to live and less able to compete with peer southeastern cities or neighboring counties in Northeast Florida. We believe this historic tax increase is only the first sip, the first taste of a bitter cup, which will be offered annually to the citizens of Jacksonville unless bold action is taken for reform. Now, while the problem is daunting, we do believe it is fixable and there is a way forward. A principled and fair solution can be crafted, which preserves financial peace of mind of retirees, limits the burden of taxpayers, and repositions our city's finances for success. We call our reform plan Freeze 40 and Forward. Before we crafted reforms, we wanted to dig into the root causes of the fund's $1.7 billion liability so we know what we're solving for. If there's a poster child for the saying, the devil's in the details, this fund would be a good candidate. Indeed, the devil's in the details, the billions are in the details, and after digging, you discover that the $1.7 billion and its growth over the past decade isn't the problem, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of what we believe to be a fundamentally broken system with numerous flaws that have metastasized for over a decade. So we make 3 evidence-based claims regarding the sources of liability and its growth over time. First, lifetime pension benefits are set at unsustainably high levels. So I present you a number, $3,419,677. What is this figure? This is the average sum of lifetime pension dollars that a rank and file police officer and a surviving spouse will receive who retires at the age of 43 after 20 years of service. After you have the wherewithal to decipher the benefits, the math isn't all that hard. And you can check my math. It's maybe a little bit hard to read on the screen, but the officer starts out with a pension of around $37,000, or 60% of his ending salary of about $62,000. He's able to collect this $37,000 immediately upon retirement at age 43. This amount grows at a fixed and compounded rate of 3% per year, regardless of inflation. And the surviving spouse gets 75% of the officer's benefit after he passes away, which it grows at 3% until she in turn expires, and all the math is up there. So given current estimated life expectancies, the city will pay benefits out for about 46 years for this retired officer and his spouse. And mind you, 46 years is a current estimate. I obtained that from the Social Security Administration by plugging in a hypothetical birth date and seeing what came out. With our advances as a society in the history of estimating life expectancies, any adjustments that have been made have only ever been made in one direction, upward. When you take into account the estimated $1.1 million in salary that an officer earns during his working years and add in the $3.4 million of pension benefits, he'll receive a total of $4.5 million in combined salary and benefits for 20 years on the force. And this averages to about $225,000 a year. Put another way, for every dollar in salary the officer earns, he will collect $3 in pension benefits. Other compensation like healthcare, vehicles, take-home vehicles, et cetera, come on top of this amount. Now, I've shown some scenarios for other employees. For example, a senior leader who retires with a $100,000 salary at age 53 and 30 years of service gets 80% of that benefit and will receive $4.7 million in cumulative pension benefits during his retirement. Again, the math really isn't that hard after you can access, which can be a challenge, and read the fine print. The devil is in the details. So, is this benefit structure financially sustainable? And is $225,000 a year too much for a rank and file officer? So you may apply your own judgment, but I offer one point of comparison for context, and that's the military. So if a serviceman retired at the same age and same salary, what pension would they receive? Well, we can run the numbers. And in sum, a serviceman receives a lower base pension benefit, a lower annual cost of living adjustment, and a lower surviving spouse benefit. Comparing a police officer versus the military, the officer would receive $1.5 million more in our base officer example in the middle there, or about 80% more than an identical twin who retires from the military at the same age and the same ending salary. And again, I also make comparisons on this chart for those who retire at different salaries and different years of service, and the gap is big, very big. Now, it has to be noted that an officer in the fund does have, in my base example, have about $80,000 or 7% of the monies that they've earned deducted from their salary over the course of their 20 years of service. And this is invested as part of their $3.4 million of pension benefits that they'll receive on average. This does partially reduce the disparity. In addition, a member of the military does receive some pretty nice healthcare benefits while in retirement. But even after accounting for these pieces, the difference between an officer and the military is expansive. Fundamentally, this level of benefits, in our opinion, is not sustainable. Second claim, the cost of the 2001 bargain to provide enhanced pension benefits was severely miscalculated and grossly misrepresented to taxpayers. The deal increased benefits to current employees, was made retroactive to retirees as well, and as a result, the basic officer that we've used in our example will now receive an additional $900,000 in benefits versus before, due to a higher starting base pension amount and higher annual cost of living adjustments. But the full brunt of this large expense was cloaked. An initial 8.5% discount rate applied to pension liabilities and low assumed life expectancies, far understated, in our opinion, grossly misrepresented the true costs of this expansion for many, many years. And this is honestly something that still puzzles me, because the new bargain basically gave an additional $1 million or more of benefits to everybody. And this totals billions upon billions of dollars in the long run, but the cost, or at least the reported cost of providing these billions, was represented as being almost negligible in the first 3 to 4 years after the deal. So $10 million in fiscal year 2002, $10 million in 2003, bumped up to 20. So this has led to consistently insufficient funding policies and the gravely erroneous belief that benefits can be greater, city services can be greater, or taxes lower while still funding benefits securely. Claim 3, this fund is opaque. Reporting on the fund's performance and long-term viability has been proactively infrequent and inaccessible to citizens, preventing regular external oversight. The fund's two most key accountability reports, the actuarial evaluation report and the comprehensive annual financial report are still to this day not available online for citizen inspection. The valuation reports have been historically ordered every 3 years, which is an eternity in finance, particularly when billions of dollars are involved. Bargaining of pension benefits with the city has consistently occurred out of the sunshine, away from public view, so out of sight, out of mind. So look, pensions are incredibly complicated, and when they're not causing huge problems, they're boring. So it's not surprising that they could take a back seat to more urgent, hot-button political issues. But over time, we've been increasingly exposed to massive long-term risks, and our prior inability to pull the emergency brake and stop this runaway train has been aided and abetted by fund practices that proactively shield it from basic citizen oversight. So when you take unsustainable benefits, misrepresented costs, and restricted citizen oversight, put those together, and that's a financially destructive cocktail, resulting in the $1.7 billion liability and placing our city's future quality of life in jeopardy. Now, before I shift gears to guiding principles of reform and our recommendations, I want to make one point abundantly clear. I don't want to diminish the value that our police and fire department employees provide to our city. The services we count on every day are absolutely essential to our quality of life. And I very deeply respect and appreciate the commitment that in service of our public safety employees. And I think every citizen wants to take excellent care of our policemen and firefighters in retirement. However, setting pension compensation at unsustainable multi-million-dollar levels, I don't think is what the average citizen had in mind, particularly when it comes at the expense of tax increases that make our city uncompetitive, or the crowding out of essential city services, including, ironically, to our police and fire departments. I personally want more police and firemen. There was an article in the paper the other day about a federal grant that the city won that allows us to hire more firefighters. And in the depths of that article, it talked about how ladder trucks and engines have been operating with one less firefighter than industry standard. So that's an eye-opener and another sip from the bitter cup of this problem. Our retirement system overall is off kilter, and we need to bring it back into balance to move our city forward. So now I'd like to shift gears to our guiding principles and reform recommendations. As we considered reforms to the fund, we did so with 6 guiding principles in mind. First, 50-50 joint responsibility for the unfunded liability between taxpayers and all fund members. That includes current employees and retirees. This problem was creatively jointed and can only be successfully solved jointly. Neither can shoulder the burden alone. No new taxes or anything that resembles a tax increase, as I believe we're at a tax tipping point in Jacksonville. Increasing tax rates to levels of the 1980s or even the 1970s is not the right positioning to move our city forward. Retirees must be able to fully preserve their financial peace of mind. We also need to continue to be able to attract and retain a top quality public safety workforce. We don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish in compensation for those who protect our community. Reforms should provide crystal clear transparency of retiree benefits to everybody. And then lastly, we should offer a guarantee to citizens and taxpayers that via reforms, a pension debacle like this will never ever happen again. So we've developed a plan that we call Freeze 40 and Forward. It has a few components, the net effect of which is $52 million of city savings, which can be redeployed to property tax relief and spending on other city priorities, including our current ability to provide public safety. We take the $148 million presently paid into the fund by the city, which is nearly double what was paid just 2 years ago, and reposition benefits to where the unfunded liability is jointly owned 50-50 by taxpayers and fund members. So I'll now describe Freeze 40 and Forward and its core components. Freeze and 40 freezes, as the name suggests, the current defined benefit plan, and then creates a modern 401k benefit crafted specifically for police and fire workers that puts a clear, transparent price on the risk premium associated with public safety work. So the current plan is frozen. Employees have earned the core value of their defined benefit, and that's paid out on schedule. That's the freeze. The 40 refers to the conversion of the current $36 million of city-funded annual normal cost in the defined benefit plan. So this is what actuaries calculate as the sum of pensions earned in the past year. And we convert this into a $40 million pool to be split across employees in a matching 401k. Now and going forward, an employee would receive a 12-to-1 match on their first 2% of contributions. The average fund member makes about $60,000 in salary. So he'll put in 2% or $1,200 into his 401k and get matched 12-to-1 or $14,400 by the city. When you spread that across 2,700 or so active employees across the fund, that totals $40 million. And we believe that Freeze 40 and Forward replaces a financially destructive, complex, unpredictable, and opaque arrangement with a modern structure that is simple, reliable, and 100% transparent to everybody. We believe it's attractive to employees as matching benefits vest on day one. It costs only 2% of employee income, which frees up 5% of their salary for their own personal priorities. They may choose to save it, buy Jaguars tickets, whatever they want, but it's free for them to choose. The benefits are fully portable and 100% owned and controlled by an employee. No one could take it away, and it can be willed to heirs. We believe that it aligns with our guiding principles in several ways. It's a robust benefit. Nothing like this happens in the private sector, and will allow us to continue to attract and retain top public safety talent in our city. The benefits are 100% transparent and predictable, and they are easy for any citizen to monitor. Any negotiated changes can be calculated with pencil and paper. And last, by shifting to a modern 401k, we can guarantee to citizens that another pension challenge like this will never happen again, as our obligation to the retirement of our police and firemen are fully and transparently funded each and every year. This is the reform that caught the eye of Stanford. So we fully recognize the premium that a public safety worker should receive as a result of the risk of their work. And we bring clarity to that premium in a format that all stakeholders can appraise, evaluate, agree to, and then consistently and transparently fund. It's clean and simple, and has the effect of protecting both the taxpayer and the employee. Taxpayers clearly understand the value of the benefits for which they are paying, and employees know their retirement benefits will be funded without fail, with no budgetary gimmickry or political shenanigans. The next component of our reforms is called Fee Chopper. Put simply, the fund employs a very expensive investment management strategy. I noted a report submitted to this task force which stated that the fund paid 78 basis points in investment management fees in 2013, while in comparison, the state of Florida retirement system pays only about 30 points. We believe that the fund can replicate its investment strategies, which aren't particularly exotic, with reputable, low-cost funds. Our goal is to reduce fees to 25 basis points or lower, and across $1 billion and change in assets, this saves about $6 million annually, with no impact on core investment returns. We would take all these savings and utilize it to reduce the unfunded liability. A new item, as this plan is ever evolving, is that I would strongly support Florida Senate Bill 246 with bipartisan co-sponsors, including Senator Bradley from Clay County. The bill allows cities with funds below the 80% funding mark to use half of new insurance premium tax revenues to reduce its unfunded liability. Given that we're far, far below 80%, this makes sense to me, and I would use these dollars to reduce the unfunded liability even further. The final component of our reforms is called Diet Cola. Prior to the 2001 bargain, the fund offered 0 cost of living adjustments during the first 5 years of the pension, and only then was a COLA tied to inflation. The shift to a fixed 3% compounded COLA is financially unsustainable. With inflation averaging, and intended by the Fed to average in the low 2% range or sub 2% range, taxpayers are in effect giving a real inflation-adjusted raise to retirees annually. So in fact, in 2013, the numbers just came out, inflation was 1.5% last year. So retirees will get an inflation-adjusted with a 3% COLA, a 1.5% inflation-adjusted raise next year. This adds up to gigantic dollars over time. So this compounding effect is whittling away our city's financial position, and left unabated will eat taxpayers and our city budget alive. As a result of 3% COLAs, it's our projection that by the end of the decade, the pension of the average retiree of the fund will exceed the salary of the average employee in the fund who's on the front lines doing the work. This is taken directly from the actuarial evaluation report, and as you can see, the difference between the average salary on the top and the average retiree benefit on the bottom is narrowing quickly. It's basically been chopped almost in half in the last 3 years. So as a result, we believe that COLAs need to go on a diet. We borrow from recent COLA reforms from the Department of Defense in the state of Illinois. We envision this cascade of COLAs represented on this chart based on the age of the retiree and the size of their benefit. So we must preserve retiree peace of mind. So if you're an older retiree with a lower pension, your benefit is 100% inflation protected. But if you're collecting a benefit in your 40s and you still have 15 to 20 working years remaining in your career, you still get the benefit, but your COLA is not going to be very high. And if you're receiving a very large pension, regardless of your age, your COLA is not going to be very high either, as the city can't afford in the long run to give $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 benefit raises every year. The exact changes to the COLAs can be negotiated and ultimately backward solved by an actuary after tabulating the impact of the plan's other components. And they'll be set at a level that reduces the annual amortized cost of our unfunded liability to our goal amount. So at the end of the day, city leaders have a menu of 3 choices to solve this pension crisis and our $1.7 billion liability. Unfortunately, this is not like choosing off a dessert menu. These choices are all unpalatable, but it's the menu that we're faced with. We can raise taxes or commit more taxpayer resources into the fund at the expense of other civic priorities. We can cut city services and divert those savings, if you will, to the fund, or we can adjust pension benefits. I consider it to be sort of 3 legs of a stool. We have to distribute the weight of the liability across all 3 legs. We have raised taxes to the highest level since 1991, and we've cut city services, including, ironically, public safety. A stool cannot be balanced long-term with only 2 legs. It will tip over, and the result is not pretty. And I point you to the reckoning that other cities have faced who have not dealt with this issue correctly. So I believe the value proposition of city government to taxpayers is the weakest it's been in some time. Taxes are at the highest levels in 20 plus years, and service has been cut to the point, again, where fire trucks are riding shorthanded. So it's given taxpayers a proverbial black eye. And we know that people and businesses vote with their feet as they decide where they want to locate. Provide a superior offering like we have in the past, and we flourish. Fail to do so, and people will reassess their choices. Our ace in the hole as a city is that we can grow our way out of the problem in terms of attracting new businesses and new people to Jacksonville that can help with the liability, but we aren't going to grow if we clobber taxpayers with another increase that sets us back to the 1970s or enact more cuts to city services that further reduce quality of life. That will send growth that should be coming our way to Jacksonville, instead divert it to St. Johns County or Orlando or Nashville. We've won such competitions in the past, but we can just as easily lose them tomorrow if we make the wrong choices and set the wrong policy. So I argue that adjusting pension benefits has to be on the table. The weight of the solution to this problem has to be more evenly distributed, and the billions of dollars of pension enhancements, the true costs of which were miscalculated and misrepresented, need to be adjusted in the most responsible of ways. The 30-year agreement needs to be set aside, and both parties need to start with a blank sheet of paper and start over for the good of the city. Now, I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness for that, but there's a reason why collective bargaining agreements are limited to 3 years. In this day and age, the prevailing economic state of affairs can turn on a dime, and we cannot burden future generations of political leaders and taxpayers with bargains established in a unique political and economic context. Otherwise, why not replace a 30-year deal with a 300-year deal or a 3,000-year agreement? So can you imagine what a 30-year deal struck in 1920 would look like before the Depression? It'd be looking great for a few years and then oops, or 1960 before the years of double-digit inflation in the 1970s. In our case, our deal was negotiated in the midst of the technology bubble, and of course, since then, the bubble burst. Stock returns were flat for about a decade. We had the greatest attack on our soil since Pearl Harbor, committed our military to 2 major conflicts, and are clawing our way out of the greatest economic turbulence since the Great Depression. So, let's shoot straight here. The 2001 deal had the effect of increasing long-term compensation of a police and fire employee by about $900,000 by those increases to pension benefits, and it was negotiated out of the sunshine. We can argue that in the courts, but I prefer that we come together in the open to reimagine and revitalize our retirement system and get our city back on track to grow and thrive. So in conclusion, we believe that Freeze 40 and Forward is a principled, fair, and joint solution. It has mutual give and take. It preserves financial peace of mind to retirees, reduces taxpayer burden, and repositions our city's macro finances and public service offerings so that Jacksonville can accelerate its growth and move forward. Taxpayers would get some relief. We'd advocate taking about half of the proceeds of the planned savings and providing property tax relief. Tax rates would go to about levels seen last seen in the late 1990s, about the time when this problem began. And while that helps taxpayers, millage rates will still be far above those just levied a few years ago. And the $96 million going forward in annual contributions towards our now suite of retirement offerings is still very sizable when compared to the recent past. Again, give and take. 100% of all retirees will retain financial peace of mind in their retirement years, and current and new employees will now receive a one-of-a-kind modern 401k benefit with a 12-to-1 match that far supersedes anything offered in the private sector. It is very robust, recognizes the premium of public safety work, and can never, ever be taken away. But admittedly, those presently with large pensions planning to become a millionaire several times over while in retirement will have to adjust lofty expectations. Those promises were grossly miscalculated and misrepresented and are financially unsustainable and ultimately destructive to the city that they protected. But we pledge that they will certainly retain financial peace of mind and have great comfort in retirement, and far, far more than the average citizen in Jacksonville will experience. And then finally, our city's quality of life is a winner in Freeze 40 and Forward. City services in Jacksonville are a low point. I think we recognize that. And we free up significant dollars to rebuild quality of life in our city. In fact, we advocate that a large share of the new spending be plowed right back and be dedicated back towards public safety. Adding new officers and firemen so that our fire trucks can get back to being fully manned, for example. So, in sum, the police and fire fund is a daunting problem, but it is fixable. There is a way forward that positions Jacksonville for growth, vitality, and success, that recreates retiree benefits in a manner that is clear, simple, and transparent, and that protects both the taxpayer and the employee. That results in a stronger competitive offering to bring new businesses to Jacksonville and to grow our economy, and that rebuilds city services and enhances our quality of life. This problem was created jointly. Jointly, it can and will be solved, and jointly we can move boldly forward together. So thank you for your time and your attention to this presentation, and I'd be delighted to take any questions.
Thank you, and we'll open. I've just got a couple. Help me understand
Sure.
The chart on the unfunded liability.
Which one is that?
How did you propose to pay down the unfunded liability?
Yeah, so 3 legs of the stool are higher taxes, and we've already paid higher taxes. We've increased them from 8.48 mils to about 11. We've cut city services, and and retiree benefits have been held sacrosanct. So it's basically redistributing the 3 legs of the stool such that retiree benefits are a third leg of the stool.
But on the unfunded, if you freeze, where do you pay the unfunded liability off? Where do you get the dollars?
Right, that comes from the freeze and the reduction of COLAs.
It's about $56 million.
That's about $56 million. And the fee chopping, so taking $6 million of our investment fees, plowing that back into the fund, taking the insurance premium tax, plowing that back into the fund.
Okay. Number 2, you alluded to the 30-year agreement and collective bargaining. We can't just impose this. How would you propose to negotiate this?
So again, I'm not an attorney here, but it's either we go through the courts. So we need to have clarity on this 30-year agreement. So I know that Florida statute says that collective bargaining is limited to 3 years, and that's by design, again, so that our future generations of elected leaders and taxpayers aren't burdened by commitments made in a different political or economic
So you
context.
suggest we litigate the...
So, well, I guess I would come with an open hand, but if you got to go to the courts, then you go.
Okay.
Then you go to the courts. It's clear as mud right now to me. So we have statutes saying one thing, we have judges saying another thing. There's a question about the benefits, whether it's negotiating the sunshine or not. So I'm not sure how you can go forward, frankly, without that decided. If you restrict that third leg of the stool, I strain to think what this city will look like in 17 years after this agreement expires.
And the last question, then I'll open up.
Sure.
Does Social Security, if you freeze it, do you have to pay Social Security?
You don't, but if the retirees wanted that, you could offer it. I would take that basically 24% match. So we're 2% of employee dollars are going into 401k, and it's matched by 24% to the city. If the employees wanted Social Security, they would of course have to put in 6.4% of their dollars in. It would take 6.4% from the city, and I would say, well, here's 24%. Do you want it in a 401k straight, or do you want 17.6% in the 401k and 6.4% in the city? Either way, the city's indifferent. So I would let dealer's choice there on the part of the employee. I would argue, though, that this is probably a better deal. I come from a generation that has greater belief in the existence of UFOs than the long-term solvency of Social Security. So again, I guess that'd be up to the employees.
Okay, questions?
Yeah,
Hi.
Tom, I appreciate your, taking the effort. One of the things I'm a little concerned, though, this has been a very public process. We've
Right.
been meeting for 6 months. And we've gotten lots of facts and figures,
Sure.
lots of expert opinions, lots of analysis of the pension situation.
Right.
Whole lots of numbers. But it doesn't seem like you've taken, the numbers you've given are like, they look like they come from Mars compared to the numbers that we've been looking at.
For example?
Well, you're essentially saying that we reduce the employee contribution to their 401ks. We enhance past the 10% that we're considering to a 401k. You're considering like 14% for the city contribution, is that right?
Yeah, so there's two pieces.
No,
Yeah.
just
Oh, sure.
down.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we do that, and then we cut taxes, and this unfunded liability just goes away. That's bizarre compared to, we've got tons of experts. Have you looked at any of the numbers that we've been considering?
So I would request that our friends at the Pew run, what would be the fiscal impact on the unfunded liability if the plan was frozen?
Have you looked at the numbers that we've been considering for the last 6 months? Have you looked at all the reports and the studies and everything that's been done?
So I've not followed it with the great level of detail that you guys have had. But three things would happen here when you freeze the fund.
No, I don't want to talk general.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But let me just go. I don't want to be argumentative, but I know that he's talking generalities and that these are great things, but at the bottom of this, there's just some assumptions that are so completely wrong. Like, for instance, you compare police and fire pension benefits to military benefits, right?
I do.
Okay. And you look at these, and about 20% of your cost for police and fire benefits come from the survivorship benefits, right?
Correct.
We've had numerous studies, JCCI, Jacksonville Community Council, all the experts we've had here. No one has ever attributed more than a marginal cost to survivorship benefits. I know that you have looked at this and said, on paper, this could be a huge cost, but have you ever looked at any of their actual figures?
Well, I ran the numbers and show you the figures right over here. So if a survivor lives for 6 years,
are based on possibilities, right? They're not based on actual numbers, right?
Let's just ask the questions. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let me just a little bit further, because I think this is important. You didn't consider the fact that military pensions carry with them the cost of health insurance. They get free health insurance with retirement, right?
I mentioned that in my
Okay.
I talked
That's
about
a
that.
huge-
It is a sizable piece, yeah.
Did you look at the study that the Times Union did comparing the Jacksonville Fund's benefits to all the other cities in the state and the state retirement, or the study that the Pew Trust did comparing it to all those retirement funds and concluding that Jacksonville benefits were actually lesser than all those benefits?
I don't know if a conclusion was necessarily made on that, but so here's at the end of the day, so my reply to that is we're paying roughly about $225,000 per year in total compensation, salary, and pension benefits alone for a rank and file Jacksonville police officer. Is that too much or is that too little? If we're going to pay for that, then we're setting our city, the overall structure of our city finances off into a different direction. I provide the military example, put the caveats on there as context, because $225,000 compared to what? So I pulled that out.
225, that's not present value, that's total benefits over a lifetime.
It is, yeah.
Do you know of any actuarial study, any financial study done by any entity that looks at the gross number of dollars over 40, 50-year periods and uses those for comparison?
So in your report, I do have a number that discounts the future benefits to 2%, to 2% inflation. So I didn't want to get this to be overly complex.
But it is
So
complex.
it is incredibly complex.
I mean, I looked at all this
Amen
stuff,
to that.
and it looks like you sat around your kitchen table and sort of looked at a few
Hey,
figures.
Ted, let's don't.
I'm sorry.
that's-
I'm sorry.
John?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
First of all, Tom, thank you for taking your time to do this.
Sure.
And I'm sure you didn't take another class for some sort of other degree that it doesn't seem.
No, yeah.
So I appreciate your civic interest in looking into this and appreciate the analysis. I think, if we're going to look at this as an apples-to-apples comparison, we've got to see a little bit more analysis where it is apples-to-apples. So one of the things is we have to see what it would look like if military personnel were contributing 7% and then
True.
investing it, and what that benefit would be. The other question I would have is, how are the military pensions invested? How are they actuarially accounted for? And how are they funded? And that would also give us some comparison, because I think that you're going to see major differences on those ends, and that's going to create a little bit more of a level playing field for the analysis. I think there's a quote that Yogi Berra famously had that applies to a lot of what we do, and that is, in theory, reality and theory are the same. In reality, they're not. And one of the big issues that we're all grappling with is if we give police and fire a premium benefit in comparison to the private sector, but it's a discounted benefit in comparison to other police and fire benefits in the state, what does it do to our workforce?
Right.
And that is that you've got these two sides of the scale. But I want to commend you on the work, and if we're going to look at this further, with Pew, I think we've got to implement some of these other analyses into it if we choose to go that direction.
So one thing I'd be really curious to see would be, let's take, Tad, you mentioned the Times Union numbers. So every fund is a little bit different. There's all these nuances into it. The transparency of funds and trying to find the right documents and dig into it to see, well, if you had 5 identical twins that retired at this age and this salary in Tampa and Orlando and Atlanta and Miami and Jacksonville and St. Johns County, how would things shake out? And frankly, how is Tampa, what discount rate are they applying to their liabilities? Are they able to do it because they're kind of have blinders on to the problem that we're addressing today? I think one of the things, when you look around the country, at least here, we're addressing the problem. In places like Illinois or California, they're just neglecting it and letting these unfunded liabilities pile up.
Okay, others. Kirsten, David, is your hand up?
Just a couple of questions on the, to your,
Let Kirsten first, right?
Mine's a quick one. I just want a little bit of a clarification about
Sure.
the predicate. It sounds like the factual predicate that your group was working under was that it was the benefit levels that were negotiated in 2001 that have gotten to where we are today. But am I right? Is that your predicate?
So it's a combination of so the three items, that the benefit levels were set at unsustainably high levels. By tweaking those benefits, it gave the average police officer, in nominal dollars, $900,000, assuming they retire at age 43 after 20 years of service and have a spouse that outlives them by a handful of years. So that's one, and then two is those costs. So how do we estimate what's the price today of making those promises for tomorrow? Those were miscalculated and misrepresented, and I don't know how we could have said with a straight face that this cost, we provide billions of dollars of new promises, and meanwhile, we only have to put $10 million or $20 million into the fund. So add those two together, you've got a problem, and then coupled with the kind of opacity of the fund, we don't have visibility into what those actuarial valuations are and those assumptions that come out every 3 years, and every time a valuation comes out, it seems like we're another $300, $400 million in the hole, so.
Okay, and that's helpful.
Mhm.
Because I think that we have been looking at a predicate that's a little different from
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And that we're looking at factors, causal factors that are a little bit different.
Mhm.
I'm curious though, our benefit levels are not that off from, say, Tampa
Mhm.
and some of the other cities that you've mentioned. And those cities don't seem to struggle to the extent that we're struggling in terms of their unfunded liability. I'm
Mhm.
wondering, have you looked at, just to, get a sense of challenging your own predicate?
Sure.
To see, well, maybe it's not their benefit levels. If these cities are offering, maybe not completely apples to apples, but,
So,
scale it to
yeah,
whatever.
there are so many different variables where the benefit level valued over 40 years could differ. So first off, what percentage of contribution is the fund asking of its employee? What is the first age that one could claim retirement? Is it 20 years of service, period? So you could conceivably start collecting at age 41 if you served after 20 years. Is there a minimum age at which you can start collecting retirement? Is there a cap on benefits? So our benefits can go off into the moon. They grow at 3% COLA. What is the COLA on those benefits? Are they tied to inflation? Are they like what we had before that says no adjustment for the first 5 years and then inflation thereafter? All of those pieces are like a kaleidoscope that form the true picture of a puzzle. And then I don't know what Tampa what discount rate they're using on their liabilities. So is it 7%? Is it 8%? So it's interesting just to, on context, read about some of the stuff going on at the state level, and they present, oh, this fund is 80% funded, we're in good shape, but they use a 7.75% discount rate. Knock that down to 7, or down to levels that I've seen you guys talk about, and ooh, that's a different picture. So what's Tampa using? Are they using 7? Are they using 9? Those little points applied over decades count up to big bucks. Just think about like if you were, when you sign a mortgage, and I signed a mortgage and like, ooh, gosh, I should have gotten 4.75%, instead I got 5, and I go, oh, my payment is, it's a little bit more than I wanted. Over 30 years, that's a lot of money. Same difference, except we're talking these liabilities over across billions of dollars, and the finest little tuning assumptions rippled over multiple decades can have billions of dollars of impact.
Okay, David?
On the unfunded liability, to follow up on Bill, so the amortization that goes into that, what's the interest rate you're using that the fund will earn? And what's the period over which the unfunded liability is addressed?
Yeah, so I would use the current assumptions on addressing liability. Is it 20 years that what you guys are using? Or what's,
Decided.
right,
Somewhere
okay.
between 20 and-
Standard amortization, so not elongating it, and I keep the 7%.
7%. And then with respect to the proposal as to how new benefits going forward would be funded, I was a little bit confused. You said 2% from the employees. There's some that comes from premium taxes, and there's some that comes from the cities.
The new, so, sorry, that wasn't clear. And by the way, thank you for all these questions, which I failed to say earlier. The first piece is what's the current going forward benefit for an employee? And with their pension benefit frozen, they put in 2% of their salary into the 401k. That is matched on a 12-to-1 basis by the city. Period. It's clean. It's simple. And that amount is actuarially equivalent, actually a little bit more than what we are claiming in our own documents is what's called annual normal cost of the fund. So from the standpoint of the employees, and it invests immediately. From the standpoint of the employee, they're presently putting 7% into the fund and hope to see that over the course of decades. Instead, now they put just 2% into their own 401k, which they control, and they have this 5% flexibility, which they may choose to save that as well, pay off a student loan, whatever the case may be for the employee.
So when you show the 24% cost for the city, you haven't tried to separate that into what's funded by premium taxes and what's funded by the city directly?
I take all the premium taxes and the savings from reductions of investment fees and apply it towards the unfunded liability. So that's $6 million roughly of reduced investment fees. And admittedly, I'm not sure how much that premium tax would save. I'm not sure if that's equivalent to what the mayor suggested with his plan that said about $4.5 million. So if that's right, then that's $10 million annually going towards the unfunded liability.
So to say it another way, you're not, without addressing where the money comes from, the 24% is the all-in total amount going in from non-employee contributions.
That's correct, and that comes from, and that's where it's coming from today is tax dollars, and that's where it'll come from tomorrow is tax dollars. Actuarially, it holds the employee harmless.
Yeah, this is important, and I wanted Tom to present this so we didn't do this after we had gotten further down the line, so this is an important discussion. Any more questions? No. I think Sherry had her hand up first, and then Charlie.
Hi.
Thank you, Tom, for
Sure.
your work on this. An observation, and I may be wrong, and then a question about the
Sure.
defined contribution concept. I think throughout your presentation, you've tried to figure out how we not only not raise taxes, whatever the source is, but actually reduce taxes over time from their current level. And your argument continues to be that low taxes equal economic competitiveness, brighter economic future, and that we will be able to preserve employees, good employees in our police and fire department, and do that as well. So it's back to some of the questions about comparative places. So if we look at other municipalities in Florida, they don't have the unfunded liability we have, and they have much higher taxes, and their economic future looks a lot brighter than ours. So I'm not quite connecting the dots in the same way that you and your team did. And you don't need to respond
Sure.
to that, but that's kind of the pattern I see here.
I'll respond to that, though, and just kind of say that the pension problem is part of just a macro direction around where the city of Jacksonville is going to head financially. You could solve this problem, and then we could be back here 3 years from now, with the Reinvigorate Jacksonville task force when if taxes are increased to levels of the 80s or 70s, or if we take that bite of the apple through reduced city services.
Great.
I'm sorry, you had a question.
Well, my question is about the 401k. We've read several pieces that say that municipalities that have moved employees to defined contribution plans, two things are happening. The retiree is worse off, not the same, not better, worse off over time, and the municipalities aren't saving any money. So I just wonder if you looked at any of that analysis and how you think about that.
Sure. Well, so again, the bottom piece of this chart here, so this $36 million is what we are representing as a city. That's over the course of 2011 to 2012, this is the last year of the actual evaluation report, we're saying the city owes $36 million to the fund for all the benefits that have been earned over the past year. And then the $112 million is owed to the fund to pay up basically for the amortization of the unfunded liability. So you could see that that 36 grows to 40. So I'm saying let's take this $36 million estimate, put a hard price on it, and give it directly to our workers starting in year one. It's so either one or two things are wrong here. Either so I guess if you don't believe that the $40 million is enough in the part of a 401k that our police and firemen would be worse off, then the $36 million number that we're presenting in our financial valuation reports is wrong, and that the cost is actually higher. So one of those truths has to be the case. Either this is equivalent, because I'm taking $40 million and dividing it up amongst all of our active workers, or the $36 million that we're presenting is incorrect. So if you believe that $36 million is incorrect, then we've got a much bigger problem here, that we're continuing to underfund the annual cost.
Sherry, did that answer your question?
More or less.
Okay.
I just really was interested if Tom had looked at any of those studies and what he thinks of them, since that's what we've been presented.
That's what we've done.
And have been reading. So.
Right.
We've also found in some places that have gone to 401ks, they've gone back to the defined benefits too.
And the other places that are using it, it's a hybrid. So that's only part of the equation.
Sure. Charlie?
Thank you. Intriguing presentation. A couple of questions. I also am not a lawyer. Certainly, a 401k is the standard that's used in the business environment today. But my understanding of the Florida statutes, and there are people here can probably answer this. When I started this process, I thought the 401k is probably the way to go because I come from a business background. But my understanding is if you freeze the present plan, you're required, and I may be a little bit off on this, you're required to immediately fund the unfunded liability. You do not have the ability to amortize that over any period of time. And that, to me, while your presentation makes economic sense, the presumption that you can continue to amortize the unfunded liability in some capacity or in any capacity is simply not correct.
So Charlie, that one I was ready for. So that is a guideline. It is not a requirement. There's so many GASB guidelines out that are being violated.
Jim, can you answer that? Are you required to pay immediately the unfunded liability, or can you amortize it?
Probably have to shorten the amortization period, but we're not required to immediately pay it off.
Okay. And Robert, yeah.
So what happens is, if you freeze the plan, your unfunded liability will be reduced by about $150 million because you're not funding future benefits. But the Florida rules, not GASB,
Okay.
but the rules of Florida say you have to switch to level dollar amortization from level percentage of pay. And that will increase your amortization payments by $30 or $40 million.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. These are good questions. I really thought this was important to get out, and so I also had asked from a employee retention and recruitment perspective, the undersheriff and Mr. Keene, and I guess it would be someone from the city, well, and from David Drain. Undersheriff, how do you respond or what are your observations concerning your ability to recruit and retain high-quality police officers? Yep.
Oh.
And we're glad you're here today, too.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me, and I know the sheriff has spoken to you, and I do want to talk to you some about the ability to hire and retain, and I'm not a lawyer either. I've been sleeping with one for a long time, and I don't mean that in the bad way. I'm married to a lawyer.
Some of us might want to litigate if we get hired, we'd want to litigate the 30-year agreement forever.
Well, I understand how that works. But what I would say about the 30-year agreement is well, if you'll humor me a little bit, I'm going to stand here and tell you that I'm going to say things up here that I don't know to be absolutely factual. What I'm going to say to you are things that I hear from people, and it's the perception of the people that work for us, and that I think is what you're concerned about here. I heard Tom talk about how this was going to be a transparent plan. It was promised it could never be taken away. That's what we were told when the 30-year agreement was hired. That's what I hear from people. Now, I hear, state statute says you have to have a 3-year agreement in collective bargaining, so the 30-year agreement is no good. But I also know there's something out there that deals a lot with contract law that says that people entering into a contract, eyes wide open, and everybody doing what they think they want to do, and in this case getting signed by lots of councils and lots of mayors, all the people that are involved in that believe they had a good contract. And so what happens to the people that I work with every day is they say, I can't believe anything they're telling me. We agree to this, and that don't work out for them anymore, so they take it away. So that's the perceptions that we're getting. And so it does create some problems for us. One of the things that goes on with some of the numbers that are run out in the example that you were just shown, is a little bit worse case, but I understand it can happen that way. It's people that are retiring at 43 years old and living to be 89. There aren't that many that retire at 43. There didn't used to be many at all. There are a lot more now, I will tell you that. They're scared to death, and they're getting out because they're afraid if they don't, they're not going to get it. I can tell you, I've been here for almost 26 years, and I can tell you that even with the drop, people that are younger, people that come on when I was almost 29 when I came on, so I was a little older than most that start, but even the people that come on in their early 20s, most of them don't want to go anywhere. In fact, I know people right now that have 2 or 3 years left in the drop, and they're saying, boy, I sure wish I didn't have to go because I don't want to, but why'd you get in the drop? And it's always the same answer, because I was afraid if I didn't, they were going to take it away from me. So we, as a big collective group, have created a bit of this issue of people that are getting in too early because people are afraid not to. And I've heard people from the pension, and I'll tell them, look, pension benefits that you've earned are yours, and they can't take them from you. And I'm hearing most everybody agree that that's actually the case. But when it gets right down to you and my family, and I have to deal with this retirement thing, and I know if I leave now I'm going to get this, or I can wait around and believe what they're telling me. When I believed them about this 30-year agreement that I got, I mean, you can see where their mind goes, and they're getting in it sooner than they should. I know that nobody likes to raise taxes, and I know that's an issue, and I'm not here to help you try to decide how to solve it. But what I will point out to you is that there are people leaving the city, and they're moving to other places, and they're not moving there for lower taxes. I got 340 some odd police officers that live in another county. They're not there because they're lower taxes in that county. They're there for other reasons, and those are reasons that we need to be working on. And so it's not all just about taxes. So I've been around for, as I said, about 26 years, and moving through the ranks like I have, I've had the ability to be around a lot of policemen and other agencies. I go to classes and seminars, and my dad was a fireman. Worked for, between the county and the city, he worked for 33 or 34 years. He retired. I think he got a whopping $26,000 a year, and he died 6 years later. And that's the reality, too. That happens a lot in our business. So we have to be a little careful with looking at those 89 ages. I honestly don't expect to make that far myself. But when I talk to these people from around the country, one of the things you need to know, and it got touched on in here, we don't have the best pension in the world. There are a lot of misconceptions about the pensions, and I hope by now you guys have all got that all cleared up. I played golf one day with a guy that was a retired fireman, actually, from New York, and they got pension on their overtime, and they had a big board, and it was a gentleman's agreement that, you put your name on the board to work overtime. Nobody put their name on that board unless they were within 2 years of retirement, because that retirement counted into their pension. And so when it was your turn, you would get your name on the board, and this guy was making huge money. But between that and insurance and all those other things that I hear people talk about that we get that we don't, we are losing police officers here in Jacksonville for the first time ever, and it's because of this issue. And it's this issue in a couple of ways. One of them is the pension, the obvious thing. They're concerned about it. And if they're young enough, they've only been on for 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's pretty easy to pick up and move somewhere, even if it's only to St. Johns County, where they're going to get very similar pension benefits. Up until just a couple of years ago, pay zero for those benefits. And and not have to be dealing with this issue. And then the other part of this issue is because of the unfunded liability and the strain that it's caused on the budget. And we actually, as you all know, a couple of years ago, actually brought 48 police officers into a room and told them they no longer had a job. All 92 of our CSO officers, a number of civilian employees. There are people in our agency, particularly those that are younger and don't have much seniority, that are saying to themselves, what's going to happen next? And so if they find an opportunity, they're leaving. I think Sheriff Rutherford has probably said to you, and I didn't bring all the stuff to, because I know he's already shared it with you, but I know he talks about, he's been here for 39 years, almost 40, and he says he can count on one or two hands all the people in his entire career, police officers, that left this agency to go be a police officer somewhere else. We have people that leave that want to go to law school or had a dream of doing something else, go be a writer or whatever it was they wanted to do. But nobody left here, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, to go be a police officer somewhere else. People left somewhere else and came to Jacksonville to be a police officer. It's a little hard to tell in this town if all you get is what you hear in this town, but we are very well respected around this country. We have a very good sheriff's office. We're very progressive. But in the last few years with this pension issue hanging out there, we have had more than 70 people, because we've started doing exit interviews and asking that specific question, more than 70 police officers that have left this agency to go be a police officer somewhere else. We had a few years ago a guy leave and go to a smaller town in Colorado near Denver. And since that time, he's recruited 4 or 5 of his buddies, all SWAT members, all very highly trained, highly skilled. They're all working for the same town in Colorado now. And those people leave because of the uncertainties here. So what I'm very optimistic about is at least we're here. When I sat down with a couple of different groups as this stuff was going on, I told the Civic Council when I met with them, we've got to get something done. I don't mean this as completely probably, but a bad plan that's definite is better than what we've got right now. The uncertainty is killing us. And it's killing the people that have to try to create budgets, and nobody knows what we're going to do next, and we're about to enter budget times again here in the city, and so we have to get this straightened out. But what I'll tell you is that we have to remain competitive, and that was mentioned in here. It's been a little while ago, but I know the Times Union did the study on the pension. They also did one on salaries. And the starting salary for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office at that time ranked 92nd in the state. I can't name 92 cities in the state of Florida. I don't know if you can, but our starting pay was there. So, and it's all fairly close. I'm not, but my point is, our pension benefits are a little better in some places and a little worse in some places. Our starting salaries are not at the top. We start changing these things, we're going to lose people. The talk of a defined contribution plan is not a good idea, in my opinion, because they can go to St. Johns County or wherever they want to and get a defined benefit plan that's very similar to the one that we have today. And not only that, and I really appreciate hearing people stand up here and say how much they appreciate public safety, police, and fire, and I know that they do, but most of the people that wouldn't probably have never thought about it, but they certainly wouldn't consider trading places with a man like Joey Burtner, who on December 12th, 1995, when he'd been on his job for less than a year, went to do a well check on somebody that had left a message that he was going to commit suicide, and he was shot and killed standing on that man's porch. And if he's got a defined contribution plan, what's he got? And if we're going to send people into the breach and we're going to put police and fire into dangerous situations and say, look, we know, and we're going to train you, we're going to give you the best equipment, and we want you to win every fight you get into, and we want you to go home every day, and we want nobody to ever lose their life in this job. We know that's not the reality. We know that will happen. And we're going to ask these young people to go put your life on the line for this job on day one. But part of what we're doing is we're going to take care of you, and we're going to take care of your family. And if we're going to tell them that we're going to give you, you can put in, $6,000 or $8,000 of what you make, and the city will put a little more than that in there. Actually, but it's not $6,000 or $8,000. It's 2% of whatever they make. It wouldn't be very much, and that's what they're going to have, and that's what they're going to have to go on with. Then I just don't think we can compete. You need to know, and I saw some nods. Everybody knows that if you've already accrued a benefit, it's yours. You've got it. We all agree. I think that the law says you got to pay that benefit. Consider this. And I saw the last proposal that came out from the city, and I'm not going to comment on one way or the other on it, but what I'll comment about is that if an employee on the job right now has 16 or 17 years, and that's going to be the new plan, and it's going to apply to them, that person has already earned, if they got 17 years, they've earned 51% of their pension. That person's going to, if I'm them, I'm probably going to just leave. I'll vest, and in 3 years, I'll draw 51% for the rest of my life. Or I can stay and work another 13 or 14 years and get 50 or 60%. Which would you do? Or if I'm one of those employees that are down on the other end of that, where I've got 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 years, again, if I'm past the 5, I'm vested. So I'll vest at 8 years, I'll go to St. Johns County, and in 25 years, I'll get a full pension from them, and I'll get 25% from here. We have to be careful what we do with this. We have to be careful about just looking at numbers and saying, I mean, if the entire goal was to do nothing but reduce that unfunded liability, we could do it. So you just have to be careful with that. We are going to lose a lot of people. I'm going to be retiring soon. It's not, obviously, this stuff's not going to affect me that way. I've been here my entire life. I'm a taxpayer. I'm concerned about that. But I'm also concerned about keeping public safety where it needs to be. And we're going to have to be competitive. And the only way we can be competitive is to have a pension that competes with the other people around us.
Thank you, Dwayne. Let's don't take questions now. Let's hear, because we need to take a break, but I'd like.
Just real quickly.
Okay.
And I'm just, one thing, we're considering in pension format, either maintaining the existing defined benefit program, or in modifying it some, or going to a hybrid plan, which would give, I think, 1% a year. So if you work 30 years, you get 30% pension, and the rest would be a 401k type. And just for the committee's consideration, in terms of effect on turnover, if you're changing the plan to having it so somebody is guaranteed like 25 or 30%, the rest is in 401k, is that going to affect turnover? So it's no longer.
I've not seen any study on a plan like that. I really don't know how to answer it. But I think that it
You're gonna
probably
see it
would
later
because they
this
don't know.
morning, right.
Okay, because I don't think they are going to feel like, because they can go to St. Johns County and get a pension that's very similar to the one they got.
So you
and
do
they're
think
going to
it
do
would
it.
have
I think it
effect?
would have an effect. Yes, I do.
And what is the cost of turnover in terms of training a new officer?
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's pretty expensive. You know, an officer is in training for a police officer. It's about 11 and a half months from the time we hire them until they're able to go on the street by themselves. So it's that plus all the people that are involved. It's probably $100,000 to put them out there.
Okay. Thank you. We really are grateful for your coming here.
Bill, just one comment, not for
Yeah.
our speaker, but for our committee. I don't know that we've seen enough information on the workforce with the changes that we're talking about. And there's going to be unintended consequences, but if we can understand the typical consequences of the kind of changes that we're discussing, I think it would give us peace of mind that we're doing the right thing for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Keene, we're going to take a break in just a minute, but would you have a brief response to what you've heard this morning? I'm thinking particularly of I'm not going to say it.
Good morning. Briefly, this plan won't work. Taking off on what the undersheriff said, someone gets killed or disabled, what are we going to do? Send the sheriff out there with a check for 2 or 3 years of their contributions and say good luck? And by the way, here's your application to get into city health plan. It's going to cost you almost $18,000 a year. Social Security, city signed an agreement, 1952. So they're not going to put people in Social Security. They're going to have a devil of a time getting out of that agreement. Pension reform is elusive, but it can be obtained. But this is not very principled when you are jeopardizing the financial future of our members as well as their families. Our longest serving widow, person we paid benefits to the longest, her husband was a police officer. He was murdered in 1932. We paid her pension benefits until she died in the early 2000s. That's a long time. She raised 4 children. Her initial pension benefit was $75 a month. She didn't get an increase from 1932 until 1970, when, over the veto of then Mayor Tanzler, the City Council enacted a minimum pension benefit of $200 a month. And when we sent those first checks out to these long retired people, they called us up and they said, "It's a mistake been made. I've got all this money." I said, "No, it's a gift from a grateful city for the service that you rendered years ago to the members and a little bit different to the beneficiaries." This plan glosses over lots of things that need in-depth study that y'all have been doing. Appreciate the work that they did. The 50-50 joint responsibility, our members have put in a couple $100 million since the settlement agreement was initiated as their part of the 50-50. Nobody here now, nobody here back when, foresaw the worldwide economic situation, the domestic stock market crash. We didn't foresee that. And this is a good idea whose time is not ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break. John, I think you had, Greg? Yeah. Greg, I want to caution you because we're in the pension benefits side.
I'm not going to say anything at all. I would
Right.
just make a request from the chairman. This concerns me greatly, the idea of insurance. And I wondered if you might find out from somebody if we do carry insurance if there's accidental death, dismemberment sort of policy, so at least that I would know.
Probably, John, do you know the answer to that, or Joey?
The city has a life insurance policy on its employees, basically $25,000 or one time your salary, some collective bargaining benefits provide for 2 times your salary. But when you're making $35,000, $40,000, you know, that's $80,000, and then you have to start paying your life insurance. Health insurance.
Okay, is that, who from the city, is that correct, Joey?
That sounds about right.
Right, so does that answer your question, Greg?
It does.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. John Thompson, I think that was a good idea that we do need to hear some impacts on the workforce in more detail than we have. But we can't do that today. So we'll come back in 10 minutes, which will be 10:30. Okay, let's come back together. During the break, Randy Wise said he had another example for us. Randy is I don't know the title, but you're the chief of the president of the Jacksonville Association of Firemen. And as we had asked Under Sheriff Centerfit to respond from a workforce perspective, Randy wanted to do the same.
Thank you for your time. Again, Randy Wise, President, Jacksonville Association of Firefighters. I just wanted to piggyback on what the Undersheriff said, something that just happened to me last week. We hired, as was mentioned in an earlier presentation, we hired 36 new firefighters on a SAFER grant from FEMA. I go in for the last 8 years, I've gone into each recruit class that we hire, speak to them on the first day, feed them lunch, welcome them. And every time I ask of this group, I say, how many of y'all have come from another department? And normally it's over half, 3/4 of most firefighters that we hire over the last 8 years. You'll get about 3/4 class raise hand. Yeah, I came from Clay, Nassau, Miami. I mean, all over the state, they'll come here. Well, this time I asked the same question. This was just last Tuesday. And I asked the same question. And again, there were 36 hired, 4 people raised their hand. It was a shock to me. Just, whoa. So, now, again, you don't have the ability to go out to the people that declined the position to find out why. But again, for as many years as I can remember, it's been 3/4 of a recruit class that has come from another department, and this time there was 4. So I think it's a great indicator of exactly what the undersheriff was saying and what has been said up here many times of the impact of recruitment. That's back to recruitment. There's a whole other issue of retention, but as an issue of recruitment, that's a big issue.
Can I follow up on that real quick?
Very briefly.
The issue before this task force, right now, what we're doing, and we know that you've had turmoil with the uncertainty, but the issue that we're looking at is whether or not we maintain the current defined benefit plan, right? And that's one proposal. The second proposal is to go to a hybrid plan. The hybrid plan would pay 1% a year. That would be your accrual rate, so you get 30% after 30 years. The other portion would be in a 401k, okay? Our question, I think our question is, what would those two different alternatives look like in terms of employee retention and in terms of future costs to the city? What's your opinion on that?
Huge, huge impact, and I will say what I said before. Next time, you'll have nobody raise their hand.
Right. I mean, and what is the reason why going to a hybrid plan would have a huge impact on retention of employees?
Everything we talked about, the future, and also if you're talking about Nassau, St. John's, Flagler, Clay, you name any of the county departments, they're an FRS.
Okay.
And that's what happened with our thing. They looked at it and went, here's uncertainty, here's certainty with FRS, there's uncertainty, I'm staying. So thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for all you do. Before we get David up here, and I was telling Bob that the chairman is feeling some anxiety about wanting to resolve things, and I'm hoping that we can make some resolutions today, but maybe we can't. But we do need to bring our hands around pension design. But before we do that, President Gulford has got a meeting at 11, and he's got one little tweak to tell us about the legislation that passed the city council related to the fifth trustee. Y'all will recall we voted to recommend that the mayor appoint that with the concurrence of the council. President Gulford, thank you for being here for all you do.
Thank you, Mr. Shine. Thanks for accommodating me on the time issue. Yes, I did want to give you a quick update on what the council did with respect to the governance and the resolution that was passed. Fundamentally, the resolution says that that the fifth member would be actually selected by the other four, but would be made up of a list of 3 names that would be given by the council. And so it's not really, this was an amendment that Senator Audrey Gibson offered last year when we addressed this. And so we included that in our resolution, which did pass unanimously, and the Duval delegation passed it out subsequent to that. I have no real problem about having the mayor, and I'm speaking for myself and not the council, having the mayor be involved in that somehow in that process. I mean, fundamentally, I think what's more important for us to consider is, and this I think is beneficial to everybody involved, including the rank and file. I think the most important thing is what qualifications end up being established for really not just that member, but the other 2 that are appointed by the council. And I think in your process that you probably ought to take that into consideration.
And we've included that.
Good, because I think that needs to be codified. And I think it's very, very important because they are critical to the whole process in the future. And I think we need to look hard at what your expectations are for those people that serve in that capacity. So that's where I am. I mean, I think I'll speak singularly, but surely have some sense of the council. I mean, we're just trying to come up with a resolution that's fair across the board. This is not anti anybody. This is something that we feel is a prudent course of action.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so the difference would be, we said mayor and council, and what passed, which was Senator Gibson's suggestion, was that the trust fund board, or the 4, pick the 5th
from a list
supplied by the city council.
Exactly.
And the mayor could participate in that part.
Absolutely.
Of it.
And I mean, I think that's fine too. If that was modified somewhat, I don't think we have any great heartburn about that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and appreciate again the time consideration and what the hours that you all are putting in. You don't know, sitting from our position, how beneficial this is for you to come back and make recommendations, which really enhances our decision-making and improves our decision-making, I think, and recognizes that there's community involvement. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. And we'll talk about that. If we have time, because I really want to talk about pension design, there's some additional governance things that I've circulated as a result of my conversations with Pugh and with Mr. Keene and others. Okay, David Drain and Jonathan, however y'all are going to do this, have a presentation on pension design, and from that we can then lead into a general discussion about the pension design.
Well, good morning, and thanks again for having me. Great to be once again in front of this esteemed task force. And I guess first I'd just like to make a couple quick comments on the presentation we had already. Piece one on just calculating the value of benefits. A couple comments on that. First, it's really important to, given that these are payments coming far in the future, you should discount them down to a lower value, and that gets you something, particularly when you want to compare them against current salary. Piece two is that, when we looked at this, and this was a really rough analysis by our actuaries, the spousal benefits are a meaningful component of the value of the benefits. That they add something on the order of 13 to 18% of cost. This, based on the plan assumptions, you've got, they're assuming younger spouses who are going to tend to live longer, and that adds a number of years of extra benefit payments. And this is, it's valuable, to retirees and to their loved ones. Three is, calculating benefits, the value of it's incredibly important because it gives you a real sense of scale of how much it costs to give someone a secure retirement. Regardless of what plan type you use. DB, DC, hybrid, it doesn't matter. To give someone secure retirement over the course of, decades, it takes financial resources, whether they're, and you can then decide on how you split up employer responsibility, employer responsibility. I don't think looking at those figures, the correct response is say, well, this is how much it costs. Can the city afford it? Rather than saying, too generous, not generous enough, just by looking at that number. Two, on governance, I think, looking at Jacksonville specific and really our research on cities as a whole, municipal pension plans often, one, don't always give enough information to voters and to taxpayers and to policymakers for them to have all the information they need. And particularly in cases where valuations are done every 3 years, don't always have enough information for themselves. So, just reiterate, the governance part of the, and the transparency and disclosure part of those recommendations is incredibly valuable. Dealing with the unfunded, freezing benefits, this is something that outside of bankruptcy, we haven't seen states and cities do. This is something that's definitely legal in the private sector, but in the public sector, lawyers have looked at this, tend to find very strong protections against hard freezes. I'm not a lawyer, not a Florida lawyer, so it may be legally possible here, but broadly, when policymakers have looked at this, there's been real legal concerns that have been raised. And then, design. We'll get into design questions right now. Just if you're really, what we're talking about is the pension benefit. And so, in all these discussions debate, unless there's real reason to think about making changes to, say, disability benefits, I think the default should be, or keeping those the same. Obviously, if these are something that stakeholders and policymakers here have looked at and are not comfortable with, one could switch them. But by and large, the issues we're seeing are with the pension part of the benefit. Rather than the disability, and so building those pieces in is an important part of the design conversation.
Great. Remember to talk into the microphone so they can hear you back there.
So this presentation is going to cover plan design issues and try to present some of our analysis on the two basic plans the task force requested us to look at in order to help you guys make your decisions. Any good plan is going to put workers on a secure path to retirement and is going to be affordable and sustainable for the city of Jacksonville. And in light of, to help you guys make your deliberations, you've asked us to look at two different plan options. The defined benefit plan defined in the mediated settlement agreement as well as a stacked hybrid approach. So these are the parameters for both the plans. You've seen these before. So one of the questions, there's two questions you need to ask about plan design. One, how do they handle risk and uncertainty? And two, how do they give retirement benefits to the workforce? And are they going to give retirement security to workers and retirees? And are they going to get you the workforce you need? Planning for retirement is fundamentally uncertain. This is about making plans for decades in the future. And there's no way to avoid uncertainty in making these plans. You can allocate uncertainty in different ways. You can ask employees to bear more of it, employers to bear more of it, but by and large, uncertainty will be there. Some of this uncertainty, some of these risks are really best borne by the employer. Longevity risk is a great example. No one knows how long they're going to live as an individual, but actuaries have a decent sense, not a perfect sense, but a pretty good sense about how long we're going to live as a population. So, in any good plan design, for example, there will be annuities for retirees so they get a lifetime benefit that never runs out. This is a very burdensome a risk for someone to deal with as an individual. It's something that's manageable for the employer. But really the risk we've been talking about here, and that's been one of the cost drivers of Jacksonville's pensions, is investment risk. The investments are fundamentally uncertain. They vary a lot, and they have a great impact on plan funding. Traditional pension plans often lack an explicit plan to deal with investment uncertainty, which can leave either the taxpayer facing large bills, or really, as we've seen in Jacksonville, employees facing layoffs, salary cuts, and discussions of benefit cuts. In the stacked hybrid plan, part of employees' benefits depend on investment returns. So if returns are poor, employees are bearing part of those costs. If investment returns exceed expectations, employees actually get that upside. But even in a defined benefit framework, like we're seeing currently, when there's losses, that goes into contributions, and that can end up impacting workers and retirees directly through the discussions we're having right now. So we just wanted to model costs, both the cost side of the uncertainty and the benefit side of uncertainty in terms of investments. Looking at this 5.4% return scenario that we've been using as a framework for something that's lower than expected, but still eminently possible. This modeling only includes new benefits, as the plan changes we're discussing are only going to apply to new employees. And all told, if returns fall short, then the proposed hybrid plan will cost about $36 million less in employer contributions from 2014 to 2044, a reduction of about 7.5%. And the city's pension debt would be about $130 million less under the proposed hybrid plan than under the mediated settlement agreement plan.
Could you say those again?
Yeah.
Sure. $36 million less in total employer contributions. And from 2014 through 2044. So over the course.
30 years.
Yeah. Now.
But you don't really see it until you're more out, right?
Yeah, and there's two reasons for that. First is simply that, in the early years, there's really not these are for new employees only, there's not much of a benefit that's been earned. There's not much assets being invested that you're going to have gains and losses on. And then second, because costs for these plans are spread out over a number of years, if I've got a loss in year one, that's getting spread out over years 2 through 31. So it's towards the later years that you see the impacts. But, by the end of that, there's, about a $6 million difference in costs. And as said, one plan has a substantially higher unfunded liability.
These are for new hires only.
Now, regardless of, as we've emphasized before, changing the benefits for new employees doesn't change the existing liabilities. It doesn't change the current risk and uncertainty in the existing liabilities. That's already baked in. So regardless of what plan type you choose going forward, there's still going to be cost uncertainty for Jacksonville, even if you went all the way to a 401k approach. But this gives a sense of how much or what a new hybrid plan could do versus a new pure defined benefit plan.
So just to make sure I'm clear, where it says the final unfunded liability under the MSA of $210 million, that means that from 2044, if we went with the mediated settlement agreement, that would be the amount of the unfunded liability just from, employees that were hired 2014.
Correct.
As I understand, if we did it at 7%, but it only came back in at 5.4%. So that's the difference. Right.
And David, the other question here is, that's the amount of annual contribution from the city?
Yes.
Just make that real clear.
Right, and that's just for new.
Can I clarify one point, which I think is what was just made? But the plan assumption is a 7% return. This
Right.
assumes a 5.4.
That's what the.
If it hits 7%, you're not going to have any unfunded liability.
Correct. If assumptions hold true, if 7% is hit, then both those lines look virtually identical. They're similar cost plans.
Right. Which is one reason we wanted to obligate ourselves at 7%, but fund on some basis close to 5.4% because of the ratios involved.
But what you're seeing is the lines separate because under the hybrid plan, the risk of the investment return is shared,
Right.
not equally, but shared between the employee and the city. And under the MSP, the risk of the investment return is 100% on the city. That's what drives that difference.
So in this circumstance, the employees would be doing a lot worse, but the city would be doing about $6 million, only, $6 million better on the hybrid plan.
I guess in neither case, both on the employee side, there's a reduction in benefits. I'm not sure that goes as far to go a lot worse. On the cost side, I think the point we're trying to show is that there's a difference. It's not, at this level of return shortfalls, it's not a huge difference. So on both cases, the city has an upside under the hybrid plan, the employee has a downside. In neither cases are those gigantic changes from what would have happened under assumptions.
John?
I think that the task force is really at a point where they understand that the more we go towards a hybrid, that the risk is shared by the employee, the costs go down to the city in multiple environments. I think the comparisons to the FRS plan are important because those are the counties we're comparing to. But we really, as we talked about before, need to understand the workforce implications. And I think this is terrific work, but I think we've seen enough of it to get the gist of it, unless anybody else really wants to spend a lot more time on it.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we were, and the workforce implications are important, but in terms of the deciding on going with the defined benefit or a hybrid, or now what Tom has presented, do we have enough information to do that? And we had asked, workforce implications aside, do we have enough information on the economics of it to move forward? Charlie?
I really have one question. I think the point was made both by the undersheriff and the president of the police and fire union earlier today. The biggest concern that I have under the hybrid plan, on paper looks pretty good, but the concern is the 2-year officer or firefighter who God forbid, dies in the line of duty. There's a huge difference between a pension, a defined benefit pension plan, and even a hybrid plan. I don't know if anybody's done this or not. To me, if you look at the math, it's a better deal for the hybrid plan, assuming you hit all these things, except for the police officer or fireman who's killed in the line of duty, and they've been there for 2 years. And that's my question. Is there a way that if somebody in the first, I don't know what the number is, 15 years of service, when the numbers don't make sense, is there a way to provide not an $80,000 policy, but a policy that would allow that to be totally funded up?
Through life insurance.
Through life insurance, is how you do it. To be totally funded up, that pension benefit, to provide that same benefit. But at the same time, everybody's not everybody's going to be killed in the line of duty. You want to take care of those people, certainly who are. And I think there's a way financially to take care of that downside risk for our public safety employees, but still then not have the city share that. And I don't know how that would, I would ask, that's the question. If you guarantee the benefit, so if that unfortunate event were to occur, does that then shift the nature of the discussion about the workforce retention and recruitment?
Ted?
Yeah, let me just respond to that. I think we need to look at the structure of this proposed hybrid plan. What we're talking about is a 1% accrual rate. So somebody with even 30 years of service, you're only looking at a 30% pension. I just don't see how that's going to keep anybody on the job for a long period of time. And my concern here, it goes a little further. Because the idea is we're going to have a lot of cost and turnover, not just financial, but also in professionalism of these departments. We want to limit turnover. What plan will limit turnover? We know that the defined benefit plan already reduces turnover. We're seeing a very small savings, perhaps at 30 years or 20 years for the hybrid plan. But that is the savings to the city. It's actually a detriment to the employee. So I think that even...
What does page 9 tell us? You keep saying that. I don't
Yeah, I would really like David to help us understand page 9.
say what you just said, so I'm just reading it.
The cost to the city, I was looking at this other chart.
Yeah. Let's go to page 9.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, so, obviously one of the biggest questions about retirement plan design is this going to match the workforce needs of the city? Is it going to give retirement security to the workers in the city? And so this is looking at the benefits provided by both of these proposed plans for someone who joins the Jacksonville workforce at age 25. They join at 30, obviously the graphs are different but similar. If they join at 20, graphs are different but similar. And so we present this two ways. One, we show what's the present value, what's the value to him or her of all the benefits that he or she's been promised. And then also because really, workers don't care what the value number is, they care about how much of their income is getting replaced. We want to show that as well. And so the green line is the hybrid plan, the purple line is the mediated settlement agreement. In the purple line, you see this, 25-year very shallow period. This is when, before you've hit that 25-year threshold where you get your benefits effectively increased. And then once you hit that 25-year mark, which you're very strongly incentivized to stay to under this plan, you are then able to retire, you get a higher benefit, it becomes a much more valuable plan.
So again, the interpretation to me is that there's a period at which you do better, looks like in the MSP, but other than that, it looks better. So I'm curious about your...
But my point is this.
Make it idiot-proof for us, David. Why is it so much better? Explain that.
It's better because
Is there more money going into it? Help us get it. Do the math for us.
Are you comparing income from the defined benefit pension plan versus an account in the hybrid plan that may provide less income? And does it register distributions from that hybrid account coming out?
it registers, so one is that it includes the DC account, includes the value of the benefits there. All the assumptions are
incomes or asset to income, because that's a big difference, right? Assets are obviously going to be greater than incomes. Is that what we're comparing?
No, we're comparing. So all the future benefits are, they're summed together. It's the value of all those benefits.
So what
and then
constitutes wealth? Are we adding income and assets?
We're adding all years of future income and then comparing that to assets.
Hey, David, isn't the issue that in the MSP or the defined benefit plan, there's significant penalties if you retire before you hit the 25 years, and so that detriment or penalty doesn't exist in the DC framework?
Yeah. So if I leave before 25 years of service, one, I'm getting a 2% multiplier. So the hybrid plan gives a 1% multiplier, but then factoring in the value of that defined contribution, which has 14% of pay going in, that's really more valuable. And second, if I retire before 25 years of service, I can't retire until I can't collect benefits until I'm 62. Under the hybrid plan, I can collect benefits either 30 years of service or age 60. When I hit 25 years of service, suddenly I'm able to collect benefits immediately. I'm getting a higher multiplier. I'm getting a more valuable benefit. So that's why you see that spike. On on the hybrid, we're looking at both the stream of payments from the pension, summing them up, and we're also looking at the value of the DC account, which can be converted into an annuity.
But not the income of the DC account.
So if you
So if you took the DC account and took that total value out, because you're comparing apples and oranges, and you put in the income that DC account's going to provide, call it 4%, which would be reasonable, then that green line really goes down substantially.
Well, so two pieces. So one, we're holding the plan is going to provide investments for the, whether directly through the PFPF or through a separate entity. But if you've got an existing infrastructure, often makes sense to use that to save on fees. And there's also going to be annuities provided through either, once again, the PFPF or through an external vendor, and those annuities can be offered at that same rate of return. You're still taking on a risk from that.
Did my question, is that accurate? That we're putting assets in comparison to income, and if you took the assets out and replaced it with the income the defined contribution could provide, the green line would drop? Is that accurate?
Only if you're using lower assumptions for the DC portion.
What are the assumptions?
The assumptions are 7% returns.
7% income?
Yeah.
Out of an account?
7% returns on the account, and then annuitized by the plan at the same rate of return that they're using for everybody.
Whereas the purple line is the income coming from the defined benefit pension plan, right?
Yeah.
So we're not comparing apples and oranges. We're comparing an account growing at 7% versus an income stream that someone actually lives on. So effectively what you're saying is, well, if they don't spend the defined contribution account and they take 30% of pay instead of 80, they're going to be wealthier. Well, I could have told them.
No,
because they could take 30% of their defined benefit plan and invest it and also have a wealth effect that would be more impactful.
I guess
invest the rest.
I disagree with that. This is looking at, this is the, I think you are treating these as apples to apples. Obviously, if you put in different assumptions for any of these, you're going to change the results you see. But if you're saying that you've got this DC account, you've got the benefits in it, predicated on any sort of good plan design, you're going to have options to get an annuity with it. As we've said multiple times, if you're not offering easy annuitization through the plan in a DC account, you're really not offering a meaningful benefit. That the protections against both longevity risk and future investment risk are something that retirees need. So it's building in an assumption about annuitization. So in both, the expectation is that you obviously have the ability to take this as a lump sum, and in many straight DB plans, you can take at least part or all as a lump sum, but you also have the ability to annuitize it, and that's built into
Can I
this.
try to simplify this a little bit? Because I sort of
That would be helpful to me. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, David. Okay. Let's say I am a police officer. I come in at 25 years of age. Okay. My first few years, okay, here, if I'm on the DB plan, I have a very low value to leaving, right?
Yeah.
This is your value of leaving, right? So let's say I'm here at 35 years. My value of my pension is here under DB. It's higher under the hybrid plan, right?
Yeah.
So the value, my enticement to leave, I'm less likely to leave under the DB plan than I am under this point, because if I leave under this plan, I've got more money in my pocket, right?
Correct.
Is it material, though? I mean, at what point does it material that somebody make a decision to retire?
Well, I understand. And let's say that's at 10 years. And then really, even at 18 or 20, here the difference, I'm looking at it and saying, if I retired 18 years, my value is somewhere around, of my retirement is basically around $50,000 here, right? Somewhere around. It's about 15 years right here, 18 years. But if I wait all the way to 25 years under the DB plan, I've got about $450,000 worth of that, right?
Yeah.
So my incentive, especially when we get into, what is this, age 41, which is 16 years, or 43, which would be about 18 years, my incentive to leave is much higher. I've got a $200,000 benefit, right, retirement, under the hybrid plan. versus if I'm here, I've got like about a $70,000 benefit, right?
And, from the, and on one end, this should, at least has the potential to help recruitment. If you're joining and you don't know, am I going to last 10 years, I'm going to last 20 years, I'm going to last 30 years, you might know that you're going to get a better benefit. It's also, we would expect that that's an incentive that's going to hurt retention. That someone at, 20 years of service is going to know, well, if I stick it out here another 5 years, I get this very meaningful increase. And, if I'm on the margins, that's going to be something that drives my decisions.
Let's say John first, and then you could, Kirsten.
I just wonder about the materiality. If you're retiring at 41, you've got a mortality tables as they are. How much of an incentive is that really? And I don't know that, Ted. I mean, it may be significant, it may not. I think we do need to figure out for this group of folks, when do we think retirement is? Is there an ideal period? And make sure that the plan speaks to that, so that we get the right incentives, the right action to get what we're looking for optimal.
Well,
I'm not sure we fully understand it.
And one of the arguments for, and I think this applies a lot less in police and fire situations, is that, sometimes it's really, for a teacher, what's the ideal retirement? Do you want to end up forcing people out or have years of great teaching service left in them? Do you want to lock someone in who maybe would be better served, wants to move somewhere else, wants to do another job? For police and fire, I think, looking at how policymakers talk about this and looking at the research, there is more of a consensus around, you do actually want people to retire at a certain age when they're not physically capable of performing the job. Now, you do see instances where we've set that too low. A great example is all these cases of double dipping, which are not really in other cities, where you have people who were police officer in one town, retire, go to the next town over. When you look at that, we don't see that as a symptom of a financial problem, but we're saying you've got a system that's incentivizing people to leave when they want to still work and when their employer still wants to employ them. So balancing that is tricky in all cases. It gets a little easier for police and fire when at least there is a very physical component of the job.
Kirsten.
Two things. One is, unlike teachers, I think that fire and police do want people to stay on 20-plus years because that's your leadership. And in teaching, you don't have the same need to drive leadership through in the same numbers as you do with fire and police. And then the second piece is that I'm interested in saying, how that wealth accrual changes at a 5.5% return.
David, let me, in my simple brain, to what John's point was, if I can remember being in the reserves, and I can remember if I stayed in 20 years, I would qualify. Well, I ended up not staying in, but if you get 5 years away, then there's a real incentive to stay. I think that's what your point was. So wouldn't that encourage people to stay for that 25-year component?
Oh, yes, 100%. And, to the extent that, from the employer perspective, having, that purple line is really going to encourage people to hit that threshold.
Right.
The limit is really from the employee perspective. Not everyone's going to make it that 25 years. Right. You're going to have people who get that lesser benefit.
Again, in my simple brain, so following the green line, which is the hybrid, despite my having an account, I really have no incentive to stay because I can go somewhere else. I've got that can be invested. Except for the mobility.
You've got the usual incentives to stay. You've got, you enjoy your job. You've got a salary that is rewarding your work. You've got but it doesn't, it doesn't penalize you for leaving early. And so there's going to be people who do that. I think exactly how much is obviously a very tough question to answer, but the expectation is that when people's incentives change, when people, aren't looking at if I stay till 25 years of service, I'm getting this.
So would the pressure to increase salaries on a present basis be higher under the hybrid plan as contrasted with the defined benefit plan, so that you're always dealing with, well, we need to pay on a current basis our police and fire officers, so they'll stay.
Right.
As compared with, well, we've got this lock on with to get 20 to 25 years, that's the incentive to stay.
And would it offset savings of the hybrid plan? Because, you know, we're, again, looking just at the pension costs, we're really looking down a narrow hallway without all the rooms on either side that are impacted. And one of the challenges I think we have is we have a deficit of information of what public safety plans have done to reform these issues. We understand that public workers in general have reformed some pension plans, but you're not talking about police and fire solely, and we are, and we don't have a model to go on with how to, you know, how to affect these benefits in a positive way for the community as well as public safety workers.
We have definitely, so we have an idea of model, but we just have.
Yeah, but and this wasn't a reform effort because they've been doing this for basically forever, but Texas does use a hybrid approach for police and fire workers in their cities.
And how do they deal with some of the issues we're bringing up in terms of the potential premium to leave at a younger age?
Well, I guess one of the issues, and this is going to be different if Jacksonville is the only one to do it, every town in Texas is under this system, so you're not competing with each other on plan design. And Texas is obviously quite large, so that means that there's less of an issue of, well, is California, doing it differently? I want to go there. The other piece of it, if you look at, say, how California's plans are doing, which are all DB, you also see those inner city competitions, and that's been a driving factor in how things are set up there.
Charlie?
Yeah, I've sort of come full circle on this. If I look at these slides, the biggest concern that I had on slide 9 was at age approximately 49, there's a big incentive, maybe age 50, to leave because of your benefits then sort of level off after that. So to me, looking at slide 9, it would appear that except for age 50 to 58, the hybrid plan is really better for the employee than the mediated settlement plan. However, if you go to slide 10, and 10, to me, tells a whole different story, which is the whole effect of sharing the risk of the investment returns. So if you look at that on the dotted yellow line, and if you look out up until age 49, even at the lower investment return of 5.4%, the employee is still better off in the hybrid plan until age 49. But beginning at age 49, there's a significant shift in that, and it moves significantly better to the mediated settlement plan, and it's because of the 5.4% return. So if you just, pick a number, I'm trying to eyeball the chart at age 57, the present value of the benefits under the hybrid plan is $500,000, and under the mediated service plan is $700,000. Well, that's a huge difference. I mean, $500,000, $700,000 is a huge, huge difference for that employee. So I said, okay, well, how do I sort of like slide 9, but slide 10 could happen. And then when I flip back to page 7, and page 7 this is the unfunded liability between the two plans. And so if you look at that, there's I think about $140 million difference between the unfunded liability in the hybrid plan 30 years from now and the mediated settlement plan. Now, I'm not going to say that $140 million is not a lot of money. It is a huge amount of money. But this slide assumes that you achieve 5.4% over a 30-year period of time. If that occurred, you would not have that large of an unfunded liability because of that investment return, you're going to make increased contributions to minimize that differential.
Just to clarify, this does include making those increased contributions to minimize.
I misunderstood that. But to me, if there's a way to solve the cliff at age 49 in the mediated settlement agreement, where the chart looks more like the hybrid plan, using it, if there's a way to design a defined benefit plan that gives you the slope, because the slope of the hybrid plan to me is the best way to encourage people to stay. Amen. To stay. It's as opposed to encourage somebody to leave at age 49 or 50, because then they're saying, I'm going to continue to accrue my benefit. And I assume that's because that's where the cliff vesting is, so to speak, at the 25 years. But if there's a way to level out that huge jump up, where if we could draw a line using a defined benefit plan between the green line and the purple line, that eventually gets you to the same point at age 60, to me, that would be the perfect plan design to encourage people to stay throughout their career, because they can't walk with the defined benefit plan like they can with the defined contribution plan. That's the problem at age, it probably gets significant at age 45,
Right.
is where they could walk. But at age 49, they're getting awful close there. I don't know if there's a way to minimize that cliff where it has the,
What does that, what helps that slope is the defined contribution component. And if you change the numbers, instead of a 1% accrual rate and have 1.5 or 2, and then you reduce the hybrid impact on the overall wealth, because what's happening is they're accruing at 1% a year, which means 30 years of service, you get 30% of your last 5 years average pay. Currently, it's 3%, I think, for the first 20 years, and 2% thereafter. So after 20 years, you're getting 60, which is already twice as good. Well, if you find a happy medium between the two and have the hybrid plan be a smaller contribution, a smaller account, and a smaller component of the benefit, and increase the 1% accrual rate to 2, then you can get a little bit better slope than the purple line.
Well, and just to bring up two options that do that. So one, this is going back to December, and I don't have this slide handy, but if you look at the Civic Council defined benefit plan, that was a much smoother slope for benefits. And, once again, whether or not the spike at 25 years of service and then the flattening and the push out effect are features or limitations are going to determine which you pick. But the Civic Council plan, was a much smoother approach towards retirement. Also, FRS benefits, as shown here in the blue, are also, it's a pure defined benefit, and it has a smoother approach. It's, now, on one hand, for a number of reasons, it's less generous than the MSP, but it's also a much smaller employee contribution, of 3%. You could either build in greater benefits on the, and raise the employee contributions to 10%. You could build in a DC component and have 7% employee contributions to that. Either or will get you to a higher line, but having that same pattern.
Can I bring up a couple of points in response to Charlie? Because I think they're important. I think, Charlie, there's a reason why you actually want that cliff there at 49 or 50. And the reason is, speaking of police officers, past about that age, their utility is not that great, you can have them do some detective work, but by and large, you want somebody to retire around 50.
Undersheriff probably disagrees with you.
Yeah, he's at a desk job. He's at a desk. So when they design policies, they want somebody to retire around age 50. That's sort of the optimum. So it gives you an incentive to stay to about 25 years of service. And my thought is that cliff is a positive thing. If you leave before 25 years, you're going to suffer a penalty. And the whole idea of a defined benefit plan is you're sort of paying somebody, it's like you pay a contractor, you're paying them on the back end for the job done. The pension is also an incentive for employees to do a good job, and especially in very safety-sensitive jobs. The other thing we need to factor in is, frankly, the pension is a carrot and the stick. If you do something that violates certain laws, if you do all these kinds of things, you forfeit that entire pension. So there's a reason why this is constructed so your maximum benefit is about 25 years. I don't think we want to minimize that effect. I think we want to maximize it because that's the way you control your workforce, so to speak. You want them to give you a good period of service of approximately 25 years. You want them to continue doing the job well. You want them to stay for that period of time. You don't want them to stay too long. And that's why I think that this model is actually very, very good.
Others. It seems to me that a real point, which really sort of gets back to John's point is that we really need to figure out what is the time we want our workforce to retire. What is that? Kirsten?
And sort of to that point, and I know everyone's aware of this, but in terms of our end game and what we want to accomplish, we've heard from the workforce about what works, because they, at least at one point, approved the mediated settlement agreement.
Right.
That works for them. We know, sitting there now, that plan works for their workforce. We don't know that the hybrid plan, that they feel the same way about the hybrid plan. And while we may recommend something, that's not the end game. The end game is what actually is adopted in collective bargaining.
And Bill, on that point, David, I mean, these are great, and thank you very much. But John's question about what you actually receive under the mediated settlement, the current plan, and the hybrid plan after 20 years, I think starting to see real dollars as opposed to all the percentages would help someone like me because it makes it real. And I know the current employees are probably doing that calculation, and I can't do it. But your percentages kind of give me pause to say, now what are those dollar figures?
Which
Is that clear? So what do you really get?
Which after 25 years would be 25% of pay in a defined benefit pension and the hybrid versus 25 years. Is the mediated settlement agreement a 2% accrual rate or 2.5%?
It's 2.5, capped at 75.
So it'd be 25 versus 50% of pay of the last 5 years.
But if you're retiring at 25 under the, so if I retire at 24 at the 24 years of service for the MSP, I get 2% available at 62, so 48% of pay. If I retire at 30 years of service, I get 30 times 2.5, I get 75%. Every year I retire in between the 25 and 30 year point. I can retire at any point, but I get this early retirement reduction that's a 3%, a 3 percentage point reduction in that replacement rate. So if I'm retiring at 25, it's 50 minus, or I guess at that point I think it's capped at like 52 or something. But so in that 25 to 30 period, the formula gets a little complex.
So I think what Sherry's asking for is if we're going to look at this from the experience of an average person in the plan, what their income is going to be and what the assets would be at retirement, and then we could pretty easily gauge what that annuity is going to pay on the assets. And historically, 4% is a reasonable assumption for a distribution of a person from an asset where there's nothing else going into it in the future. So,
but that 4% is, I guess, one of the things that is based on self-insuring against longevity risk. It's if I've got my pile of money, this is something I can be comfortable as a rule of thumb taking out, not knowing how long I'm going to live. So the benefit is greater if I'm getting an annuity, which is, as I said, why we think that, or why our research shows that having an annuitization option is so important.
So it's 5%, but we still need to look at the
actual dollars, right.
impact to that average person, because I think these graphs can be difficult to understand.
Yep. They can for me. Charlie? We'll have public comment later.
Yeah, you've modeled the MSA here. Have you done the modeling of the administration's latest proposal and how that compares to the MSA?
So the administration's latest proposal doesn't change for new employees, doesn't change the MSA benefits.
Okay, so this is new employees, but it does change the unfunded liability calculation.
It changes unfunded liability. We don't have a number for that. Possibly Robert has that at ready, or possibly not.
David, this doesn't use the COLA in the MSP though, right? This uses a reduced COLA. This is 1.5% COLA?
Yeah, so the MSP is a 1.5% COLA.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cap of 1.5%.
So the chair, wanting to move us along, wants to know what y'all want on pension design. And I'm here. Let me hear. Number one, we want to hear from workforce in a more prepared sort of way. Number two, it seems to me that then edges into the question of what is the preferred, from a workforce perspective, preferred retirement setting. And then number three, comparing on a dollar basis what the difference would be in the hybrid and the defined benefit, and I think we ought to use the MSP plus the mayor's proposal, and then plug in what the mayor's proposal is for existing employees, what that would mean. Because I think, as I've talked with the Civic Council, I've talked with the city, I don't know that the fund and the unions would agree to the existing employees, but that's something we have to recommend because that's going to collective bargaining. Right now, are those the kind of things that y'all would need for next time?
And to help that along, I think a good data point would be what happened to the Atlanta workforce, and maybe in comparison to surrounding counties that don't have a hybrid. And
Okay.
what does the census experience of employees in Texas look like compared to Florida? And let's determine if that's, let's begin with the end in mind. Is that the result we want?
Okay.
And I think on the Atlanta point, I'm not sure that there's going to be enough data to answer that question. Just the reforms are recent enough, but we can compare workforce in Florida in public safety versus, or at least I think on the Texas side, I'm pretty sure we can. On the Florida side, I believe we can as well. Just to clarify, everything we've heard from stakeholders in Jacksonville, they've been very clear that they've got on the police and fire, they've been very successful at getting a very long-term workforce and that they've achieved that. So obviously part of that's the benefit design, but from what we've heard is also how they recruit, so I think comparing state to state would be the right comparison.
Well, Atlanta's interesting because we have 3 years of data, so we could see what the next 3 years brings for Jacksonville potentially to our workforce. And perhaps whatever plan we pick, it gives us an idea of what we want to be thinking about. If we pick a plan similar to Atlanta, what do we need to be doing for public safety?
Can I ask for one other bit of information?
Okay. Somebody writing this down, David. I'm trying to, but we can get this afterwards to nail it down. But I want to make sure we've got the information that we need, because in fairness to the workforce we've heard about, we do need to make a decision to go to the council and the mayor and the fund. So yes, and then David has a question too.
One other question I think we need to have. I understand the mayor's new proposal and, in the various different aspects. The one part of that proposal that I'm a little concerned about in terms of its impacts on current employees is reducing, and it's not a question of should the drop return rate be reduced. It should be reduced. It's too high, okay? But the question is, what will reducing that do to the current workforce? Because right now, I would sort of think that anybody who's eligible for drop, who's got more than 20 years, if we reduce that drop earnings rate from 8.5 to a much lesser rate, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see immediately all those people get into drop. And my concern is, and because of that.
You mean between the time of enactment and the time of our
Right. So my concern about that is, I think that's a pretty definite result. I would, that's just logical. So if that is the result, how much does the city really save in terms of unfunded liability by going to that change in the drop? Because if it's not a lot of money in terms of the unfunded liability, if it doesn't save the city a whole lot of money, but it's a significant incentive for employees to leave, then I think that's something we need to take a look at, because
Though I believe from the city's proposal that the drop changes do not go into effect for anyone eligible to receive drop at that time.
All right, it's only for new.
Oh, it's
it's for currents, but it's for currents who are not eligible.
Oh,
that's right.
So
okay. Well, maybe I'm mistaken then.
But we've already heard that people have already taken advantage of that because of the uncertainty.
Right.
That's true. Okay,
Right.
Dave?
Yeah, I think that we've heard from a couple of standpoints, a sort of a sense of urgency that we have to sort of figure this
Right.
out. So I think we're doing all the right things. I think there's a lot more commonality than differences in some of the things we heard. Just if I could just reflect for
Sure,
for 3
that's-
minutes. But
absolutely.
So like at the the speaker we heard this morning, Mr. Brennick's, I think the big things that come out of that to me are our costs are high. We got to take our costs down, and certainly the MSP does have a significant impact on taking costs down. The 401K, I think, is, if you had a clean sheet of paper, there's a lot of benefits in the 401K idea. We don't have a clean sheet of paper, and we are in a negotiating position, and that's a relevant point, right? And we don't have Social Security. So there's some considerations that come to play there. But the spirit of what that seeks, I think, and transparency and governance, we're addressing a lot of those. And then when you look at the hybrid plan versus the deferred benefit plan, I mean, a lot of this is the assumptions that we're making. The good question came up about what do we think about the way benefits accrue? And I guess from what I heard, I would echo as well that there's probably seems to be more of a pull for this backloaded approach. But the point would be, I think either plan design can be made to match the accrual rate. I mean, that's a way that the plan is written. And I would have thought maybe if we want to have this retention aspect versus a non-retention aspect, that the DC plan or the hybrid plan element could actually provide greater contributions in later years than in earlier years. So I think there's ways that in either plan, you could sort of figure out what's the path we want, and then let's make that path come out of our issue. So for me, the real issue is what's the sharing of risk and what's the cost? And I think the defined benefit plan, it has so many good things, and then it has so many risks, right? And the good things are you get a group of folks who are dedicated as investment professionals who figure the right thing out and try to do, set the right course for things. And certainly a group can do a lot more than individuals can. Individuals have to take a lot more ownership in a DC plan. But if properly managed, there's every expectation that the hybrid plan should do well, right? So a lot of it is the paternalistic approach we want to take with respect to defining a benefit and having a benefit. And I think a natural inclination to want to go there just has to be bounded by the need that we have to have a governance process and a cost process. And I think there's a lot to be said for the issues that the power of defined benefit also becomes a weapon if we don't understand what the heck we're doing in terms of promising future benefits and what the real costs are, right? So I think maybe a natural outcome of this is there may be a preference that the task force might come up with that says we endorse a DB plan. But if we're going to get to something that is cost contained and is properly governed, it's a negotiation process to get there, right? So we can either all join together and support a well-defined and appropriate cost DB plan. And if we can't get there and we have to go the hard way and we have to go to litigation and we're going to be butting heads, well then let's divide and conquer and come up with a plan that doesn't take risk on, right? But I think there's a lot of mutual joining. And in terms of the promise, I mean, the DB plan, it's true. I mean, employees were promised benefits, right? And a 30-year expectation. So now we're having the discussion again. So there's equity in that argument, right? So the DB plan, if it's not funded, it really is a hollow promise. So just as much as the power of a DB plan is there, the need to fund it is also there. So I actually think the commitment to funding, the commitment to governance, and the containment of costs to reasonable levels provides a lot of joint support. But if we can't get there, I think it's important to keep hybrid and other options on the table because it reflects an inability to manage it the right way as a directional sort of as a view. And well, I said a lot, I didn't mean that, but
that's very helpful.
Yeah.
The problem is unless Randy Wise wants to get up here and say, yeah, we support the defined benefit, which I don't think he's going to do,
right,
because of Judge Wallace's order has said that's going to be the subject of collective bargaining, so he's not going to get up and do it unless you're getting up now to say that, Randy.
I'll say something else if I got it.
So, but that, from a tactical perspective, that's very helpful,
right,
because the one thing that keeps coming back to me with Tom's presentation is we're going to be in litigation for 5 years if we go with the defined contribution plan. I mean, and I just don't, because we have to resolve the 30-year agreement.
right.
And we also have the collective bargaining issue.
Right.
So that is unattractive, given the need for certainty as soon as possible.
Right. And the one thing I think we need is, well, how do you know what a properly contained benefit cost is? And so, Robert Zubi at my request had done some work on normal costs. I think that needs to be submitted to the whole committee, and there needs to be transparency around. So We had a plan that used to cost 30% as a benefit cost. And, where does the MSP fall? Where does the proposals fall? Have we gotten this trim tight enough that we can work with it? And measuring it at not a 7% return, but a 5.4% for. So are we signing up for, what are we signing up for, right? And if we can get something that we feel like is appropriate, feels like it's within the realm of what other benefits are, then it feels like we're starting to come together on this stuff.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I know we can't speak to the parties, especially the unions and that type of thing. About
We can speak to the fund. We can't speak to, not about pension design, but we
Okay.
can speak to them about everything else.
If, for instance, because I would love to be able to talk to some of the folks, the unions and that type of thing. If I were to notice that and put it in the sunshine, would there be any prohibition against speaking?
No, but as long as they would be willing to talk in the sunshine.
Because I think it would be a good idea before the next meeting that there be some conversation, maybe in the sunshine, for anybody who wants to do that, to speak to the union.
Okay, Cindy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the order is being appealed and all of that, but the order said that you were doing collective bargaining, and we can't have a record of anybody sitting down with a pension and that being collective bargaining. As you know from practicing in this field, that makes a very awkward record, and that was a concern. If you notice it, then you are saying we're meeting on collective bargaining if you're talking about pension. I don't agree, Kirsten, but if you read Judge Wallace's order, it's that broad and it's on appeal. And I think it's very clear for us to get back to who is a designated
Right,
collective bargaining
we can't collectively
representative.
bargain. We're not.
Well, one would say you couldn't, but that's what the order said. So I think the committee needs to work as a committee and ask for the information, we provide the information versus single members kind of on the side.
On their side.
Until we
Kirsten.
get some clarity.
Kirsten?
I don't think, and I am interested in your opinion, I don't think that the order would prohibit us hearing feedback from Randy or other, or the the police union president from getting their feedback on the MSP or the stacked hybrid plan. I mean, that's not collective bargaining.
It won't,
none
but
of
they
it was
refused to do that the
collective.
last time when
Right.
you were gone. We've asked them to do that.
Right, but I'm saying if they agreed, I don't think that would be a violation.
None of it is collective bargaining. And as you know, only PERC can say what collective bargaining is. That's a difficulty of working with an opinion that redefines the universe as we've been using it. So it says those are the languages in it. I don't want any member on this volunteer task force to be in violation of it. And I don't want to give any credence to a position that when two people speak and they're not actually the PERC designated bargaining agents, that they're doing collective bargaining. I think that creates an issue for us in the event this isn't resolved, and I'm litigating that elsewhere. So
Could we do a subcommittee of this?
you can have subcommittees meeting, it's the individual members noticing, the subcommittees are then doing the task force work and not.
Yeah, it's probably better, though, given where we are, that the whole committee hear whatever it is that they would be willing to say.
Okay.
I really think that's the case. So,
Thank
all right, I will articulate what I've heard in what y'all want for the next time, and I'll send that out. Cindy, can I send that out as an email, not to discuss, but to say, here's what I understand we want. Please add or subtract. Is that a violation of sunshine law? Okay. So I will do that and get that out so that we will have that by next week on the 19th. Hopefully we'll get that done today. I mean, today or tomorrow.
And we also get the normal cost.
Yes, and that have you got, is that chart right there?
Yeah, I thought I had some questions for Mr. Dizzy.
Would you do that, and then would you circulate? Well, I guess it'd be better to send it to me.
Unless there's an objection, I would have the city submit it to the task force.
That's what I would do, right, to Carol. Okay, great. So let me just pose this. Is there, having heard what we've heard, is there any desire to continue along the defined contribution path, or do we need more information for that? Are y'all ready to make a decision on that now, having heard all we've heard, or do you want to focus on the defined benefit / hybrid at this point, taking into account the the possibility of litigation and the delays. And I'm posing that question. I don't have a dog in the hunt. I just want to know where y'all are.
Bill, do you mean only a defined contribution plan?
Like Tom presented this morning. Do y'all want to set that aside going forward, or do you want to, because that will save us time if you do, but if you don't, we need to get that analyzed by Pew. So I need to test where y'all are on that. There's a motion to set aside, there's a second.
This is for the DC only.
The DC only.
Right.
Not for the hybrid, just.
Not for the hybrid, just the DC only. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. That helps. And that's not to say that Tom's proposal isn't creative. It just comes to us at a inopportune time.
Could we request a modified hybrid that doesn't have such a low defined benefit pension? So somewhere in between the proposed hybrid and the full DB plan, can you increase the accrual rate and make it look more like the MSP in some regards?
Yes, we could do that. And why don't you send to me what you would propose on that, and then we'll get that to David. Or you can do it right now.
They're going to, I think, come up with some good ideas as they get into the laboratory and start running numbers. So it could be 1.5, could be 1.75, could be 2. But it gives you a little bit of room to work with between 1 and 2.5.
Okay. The other question that I guess I would like to get a sense of the task force on for our analysis purposes. So early on, we presented a number of different DB plan types, and the decision was to focus on the mediated settlement agreement proposal. From this conversation, I think I heard some interest in going back and considering something that was a pure DB but had a smoother approach. Is it the interest of the task force that we look at that as well, or do we want to keep the focus to the mediated settlement agreement?
We're information gathering. What do y'all want?
I'm in favor of that, to see that this, and I understand what Ms. Delegado said, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that smoothing out would be a benefit, but I also think in terms of what you just mentioned, John, is we need to have embedded in that the cost if somebody were to die in the line of duty, to make sure they get the kind of benefit that we would expect they should get in the early stages of their career.
So you would include a life insurance component of that over, let's say, the first 15 years?
Or maybe do a 30-year term on an average 25-year-old, and that's going to have a level cost.
I mean, I think we would just match the existing death benefits built into the plan, for lack of, unless there's a strong argument against.
Okay, Cindy?
The state requires a payment of $100,000, I think it is, if you die in the course of performing your
Does that come out of the
duty.
pension fund, or is that separate?
That's a city, but
From the
it is,
city.
but it is a payment. No.
Actually, there's state benefits and there's federal benefits. And these are, the state benefits are required. So for somebody who, a police officer, firefighter who dies as a result of accidental death in the line of duty, it's a mandatory $50,000 benefit. If they're working a traffic accident or in fresh pursuit, it's $100,000. If it's death by an unlawful act in the line of duty, it's $150,000. All those amounts are adjusted for inflation annually. The federal program is the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program, was set up in 2001. Provides a $250,000 benefit adjusted for inflation, which now is $333,000.
That's to every police, that's not, is that fire and police?
Fire and police.
Okay.
Is that one time or annual?
One time.
But it has to be in line of duty.
In the line of
Okay.
duty, correct.
So it would be helpful, could you provide us a list of all of those required benefits? Because that will take into account, that gets to Greg's question earlier.
I think the question at hand is under the current or under the MSA, there is a pension benefit for the surviving spouse.
Right.
And there would still be one in the hybrid. It would be less, and so we're looking to fund that gap potentially if possible.
Right. But I think we need to know what all these benefits are to have a full picture of it. So if
Can I email it to
What
you?
is the exposure in terms of, what is the trend?
What's the, right.
I I don't know that.
Well, David might be able to find
Well,
some of
to
that.
save a little bit of headache,
Okay.
those benefits are what they are, whatever plan we choose, so that doesn't change. So let's focus on what changes if we choose a different plan. Let's just focus on, I think we're getting too much on the.
Well, no, I just think we need to see what they all are, because if it depends on whether we would favor a $25,000 policy or $100,000 policy.
But they are what they are. We're trying to make up the difference in pension benefit, which would be the difference in the two plans here. Those benefits are going to be there no matter what the plan is, so it's.
Right, but we're also trying to make up the benefit if someone dies too young.
Well, but I guess
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
you know, the question is, you know, so far we have not heard on the current benefits that they're too high or too low. You know, obviously if there's problems with what they are, then there's problems with what they are. So I think to go to John's point, you know, the goal is to, you know, in thinking about new plan design, make whole, don't reduce death benefits, but, you know, just try to keep them as they are. And if there's a purpose for a discussion of, you know, thinking about those, you know, that's beyond at least any analysis we've done, and that's a broader conversation.
Yeah, we're not changing death benefits, we're changing pension benefits, and what we just need to look at is what that impact would be.
I understand that, but in my simple way, what Charlie was asking for, is there a way to bring that gap together or in the early years? And I may not be understanding it, but that's what I thought you wanted to do.
Well, it was, but I think John hit on the point, though. Under the defined benefit plan, if somebody were to pass away, they get X amount of dollars.
Right.
Under the hybrid plan, they would get X minus something. And so the insurance would be designed to fill in the gap to make sure they would not be penalized by being the hybrid plan if they were to die in the line of duty in those early years. Because that's I heard that loud and clear. That's a big issue, and I understand and appreciate
and that's what I thought we were.
It's the gap.
That's right, and that's what we're trying to fill. I understand that. But in order to have the full picture, it would be helpful to know what all the death benefits are, so we have it before us. Yep.
Something else I think would be helpful for us to know, John alluded to it earlier when he mentioned Atlanta, but I'm still kind of focused on those pieces that we read where people are backing off the hybrid plan. So knowing a little more about other folks' experience, have been doing it for a while, whether it's Atlanta or somewhere else, would be enormously helpful, I think, so that we have our eyes open about this. And then the other thing is the management of that part of this. I haven't heard us say anything about that. I mean, you know, who's doing that? And I think if I were an employee, I certainly would want to know.
As I understand, the
how that thing
hybrid,
works.
that's managed by the fund.
So we've already made that, that's your recommendation, David? So
I mean, that's, you know, obviously one can go any way one wants, but you've got this infrastructure, you've got people with expertise, you know, rather than, you know, pay for two things, doing the same thing, you know, utilize one. I guess on the, you know, so the people have walked back, there's two states that have walked back from DC, West Virginia and Nebraska. In West Virginia's case, they switched to a pure defined contribution plan in 92. They switched to a pure defined contribution plan. Their defined benefit plan was woefully underfunded. But the challenge was they found that workers were not leaving with sufficient benefits, in part because, you know, given the investment choices that the workers were offered and given the choices that they made from that list, they just weren't getting great returns. And so the state decided to let all the people in the DC plan go back into the previous DB plan and reinstituted the DB plan for new hires going forward. And then the other one is in Nebraska's case, they had a DC plan historically, but once again, we're finding that employees were taking, you know, the very conservative investment options, weren't getting the returns that they needed to, and switched to a cash balance model. So still an individual retirement account, but the state's managing all the money for people and giving them a guaranteed minimum return and giving them annuities through the plan itself.
Just focusing on that a little, Sherry, I think you're right. There's not a lot of research on any of this stuff. And what's I think is a little frightening is in the last 5 or 10 years, especially this economic crisis, places have just been saying we've got to change our pension structure for the sake of change. And I don't think there's a lot of science or a lot of really thought that's gone into that. And I've looked at the various studies around, and none of them have done much of an analysis. But So I think that's a very real concern. If we can get some analysis, I think that'd be helpful. But I think we've also got sort of a public relations problem, and because whatever we come out with, I think we ultimately want to sell to the public and for the elected officials. And the real problem I see is that there are sort of some myths surrounding pension reform. And I think some of this came out, and the first is that, the problem is exorbitant benefits that we currently have in the system, which is simply not the case, comparing them to everybody else. The second myth, I think, is that by simply reducing employee benefits, we get rid of the unfunded liability problem, which is...
We know that's not true.
We know that, but the public doesn't.
Right.
And the third is that, and this is the other third public misperception, is that if we simply got rid of the defined benefit plan and we did some kind of defined contribution, all our troubles would go away. And I think that's what's really, because I talk to some very intelligent people, and I hear that over and over again. I'm sure everybody else does.
So as part of our role is to communicate to the community, should we have, just to start with, a 3-point communication
right
to the media to make sure they understand the framework of what we're dealing with, and if we want to add on to that in the future, we will. But it's a good point. There's a lot of misunderstanding.
Right. Right.
And I think, unfortunately, I think we need to communicate that, and I would hope the media would responsibly communicate those things in the future.
I will say they have been generally very responsive to and willing for us to talk with them. Not always, but they've been very
Had a little issue with the editorial the other day, and I responded to that, and I told them I didn't think it was very responsible.
I was surprised at the breadth of the half a page of the editorial. All right, well, so I think we've got our marching orders for next week. John?
I, for one, and I don't know if we need a motion, like the idea of a simple 3-point communication to make sure they understand the framework within the decisions we're making, if the committee's comfortable communicating that, because I do think that it's very confusing as you read the articles for people to understand what goes into play.
I'd be willing to draft something and circulate that, and maybe that would...
That would be helpful. That's not a violation of sunshine law?
I think when you get into who caused what, you go down a path that is subjective, and, there was a point made this morning that when we adopted COLA benefits, we may not have appreciated what we were signing up for. I believe that's absolutely the case. That's hugely expensive.
I do too.
I really do take exception to the argument that we're placing blame. I think it is critically important for the public to understand how we got here. And we've said over and over the actuarial assumptions were wrong. The public needs to know that. They don't know that, and there are a couple of other things that we say over and over about how we got here. That doesn't blame anybody.
Right.
It just says, here's the reality, and I think we make a mistake, Bill, if we don't communicate.
Well, maybe wrong is a value judgment, okay? If you go back to that period of time, and you said, is an 8.5% investment return on assumption unrealistic, there'd be a lot of support that would say, no, it's not unrealistic. What it didn't consider is the fact that, much like we're doing here today, we might hope for 7, but with what reliability can you count on 7 is a different question. So a little bit of the slippery slope we get on is the wrong, says we had a failing, and I think it's really the need for greater transparency and governance and understanding on a complex issue. And so if we think it's helpful to, I think communication is a good thing, but I just think we have to be careful.
I think I can craft a op-ed sort of piece if they would do it and do those without casting blame, but saying, here's what, and I'll try to do that. And Cindy, can I circulate that?
You can circulate. I really would caution that if it's something that it's going to be collaborative, then circulate it for the next meeting for people to come. We cannot respond to it, just send it out on the first time. That's
all right. That's okay. That's a good idea. All right. Y'all had asked last time for an idea of what the buckets were for the, thank you, David.
Thank you.
What the buckets were for funding the unfunded liability, and I have nosed around, and here's what I have gotten from various parts of the administration. The first is the mayor's proposal for additional JE funding, which we don't know much about, but the number there is $40 million. That's on the table. Ad valorem taxation, an additional $1 million would raise $44,300,000. 44.3. There has been a discussion about raising the franchise fee that utilities pay. That would be notably JA. The franchise fee is currently 3%, which is projected to generate $40,215,000. That's the whole 3%. So that if we raised it, if we doubled that to 6%, we would raise another $40 million. So that's $13,400,000 a percent.
Wait, say that again? It goes from
Each percent increase is $13,400,000. And if you did all 3%, that'd be $40 million. Roughly.
Just to make sure everybody understands, there's a little nuance in the franchise fee. Would you just answer the question for each one of these options? Who would pay? Who would pay? So, for example, we'd say ad valorem. Everybody would know that'd be the property
tax,
owners.
right.
So would the same be the case in
The franchise fee would be the customers of the utilities. Right. The other thing that has come up, which at first we were excited about, and there is a sales tax in Section 212.055 of the statutes, which provides that in our case, the city council can levy a discretionary sales surtax of up to 1% for emergency fire rescue services and facilities. So we could raise sales tax by 1% to fund those services, and we could take that mill, or an equivalent amount, and use that to pay the pension. But the statute goes on to say that if you do use that sales tax option, you have to offset the ad valorem budget by the amount realized. So here's the way it works. Since the sales tax doesn't come in for a year, if you did raise it, you would have to reduce the ad valorem budget by that same amount 2 years out. So that's the way it works. So what we have considered is, well, suppose we raised the millage rate. Let's make an assumption that 1 mil and the sales tax 1% is identical, which they're not, but just for this purpose. If you raise the millage rate by 1 mil this year, and then and the sales tax requires a referendum. So then if you went in August to the taxpayers and said, the city council has raised the millage rate by 1%, you have an opportunity to say you'd rather have that be in a sales tax. So they would vote sales tax or not. If they voted for the sales tax, you would have already increased the millage rate by that 1%. So you go back the following year and you then reduce it by the 1%. So you're really back where you are today, but you've shifted the fire services to the sales tax. So you've effectively raised the money from that. That is a broader way of providing the tax, and in many ways it's intriguing to do that. Unfortunately, as we got into it, the statute also has a limiting provision that says that tax cannot be levied by a county that has enacted two other discretionary sales taxes, and there are about 5 or 6 of them, which have a maturity date. We have done that. We have on the books now the BJP, which is one of those discretionary taxes, and we have a JTA-related sales tax. So it's really iffy. Cindy and I have been talking about since the BJP doesn't have an ending date, whether or not that could be construed as only one sales tax with a maturity date. That's a legal issue. So it's looking more and more slim that we'll be able to use the sales tax option. But I wanted to get that before you.
And how much does 1% typically produce?
It was $68 million. So, Kirsten.
Has anyone ever provided us a comparison? I know the Civic Council did a little bit of this, but it was a long time ago. Just a comparison of the millages for Duval versus some of the comparable?
We've gotten that before, and Chris or Joey, or Ronnie, can you get us that chart that shows the millage rates for the various counties? Huh? Okay, that'd be great. I know we've had that before, so we should have memorized that as a committee. So that's the revenue side of things. Any other ideas, Greg?
And again, I'm not offering any opinions, and I just will take this opportunity to say that any votes that were taken today that relate to pension design benefits, I did not vote for, and if you would have the record show that I abstained. It was mentioned earlier that the chapter funds, the insurance funds, could be, if half of it, if the Senate bill passes, that'd be another $4.5 to $5 million.
Okay, right, sure.
And that is 175, 185.
What's that?
The chapter funds are the ones.
That's right. But remember what Mr. Keene told us, that requires a vote of the members.
Would the state, would the Senate bill change that?
I don't know what the Senate.
That's my question.
Right. Okay. Good. So, sale of city property. What we decided earlier was that we did not favor contributing real property to the fund, but that we did and would recommend that attention be given to the lazy asset study, and that if in a proper procedure, that if that was sold to developers, that cash could be put over to the fund. That's where we left that. So that is another resource.
Since we're talking about options, and I have no opinion on these options, but one of the considerations for the committee might be to designate a portion of the millage to pay back on the unfunded liability.
And the problem, just so you'll know, that Cindy and I've had repeated conversations about this, is that there's no way to bind the city council from year to year. That is a real issue. So it's subject to appropriations from year to year. So we can't obligate the city council to fund anything from year to year. Is that correct, Cindy? Right, that's correct. There's one other thing that's come up that I'll raise. Cindy had inquired of the city bond council if there were any ideas in funding. And preliminarily, it looks as if we can create a what's called a Section 115 trust. I think 115 is under the Internal Revenue Code. I don't think it's the Florida statutes, whereby we could contribute what we want to fund for the unfunded liability to that trust rather than to the fund itself. And that would still, as I understand it, it would be tax exempt, and the earnings on it would be tax exempt, number one. But number two, it would still qualify actuarially for computing the unfunded liability. I don't know the legal answers to that. Robert, you might know the answer to that.
I've seen the 115 trust used more for post-retirement health, and it does count as an asset.
So that would count. So in terms of governance, that's another tool to try to bring everybody together. Instead of giving the funds to the fund, we could fund it to this 115 trust. So that's another option on the table. So, we need to hear from the public. Is there any, we have a meeting next week. We will continue our discussion, and David is going to have a meeting of his subcommittee.
Well, yeah, in fact, I guess John's left, but yeah, so the question was, the city would like to discuss some more ideas they've had on the funding proposal that they presented earlier.
Correct.
So a suggestion has been made for Tuesday morning, and if 8:30 would work, I would suggest 8:30 to 9:30. And so it's subject to maybe the city making provisions for us to meet here. That would, I think.
So we'll schedule that, we'll notice that, and everybody is invited. This is where the mayor is going to flesh out a little bit more of the JA proposals, as I understand it. Chris, is that right? Okay. So we will keep trucking along. We are coming to some decisions, I believe. We're not there yet, but now we need to be thinking of, now we need to be making our decisions. So,
Quick question on the revenue side.
Yep.
Are we trying to raise $90 million a year or half of that?
that's what we will be talking about. Yeah, the number I've been using and thinking about it is somewhere between $190 and $210 million in the aggregate. But we haven't had the pension design yet to really nail that down. But those are the numbers I've been using. So, Gwen?
We have somewhere these options all listed so that we look at them and know what.
You mean the revenue options? Right. I'll circulate this to the task force. So we now will have public comment. Each person has, we have 1 minute per person, and you'll go to the microphone and state your name and address. And we're now open for public comment. We have 1 minute. State your name and address.
Bill Gassett, Touchton Road, Jacksonville, Florida. Mine's first an administrative question on the retirement reform proposals. On page 11, 2, it says with no more than 25% fund in any. And then on page 12.
What are you looking at? The governance proposal?
Yeah. And then on page 12, it says, paragraph 4, with no more than 80% of any fund in interest-bearing obligations. I just want to make sure that's
in the investment authority. That's in the statute.
Well, I'm not questioning. I just want to make it seem like it's contradictory.
That still has to be vetted.
Just real quickly, if I may, I would like to encourage you to further look into the military program because the presentation earlier today was based on some kind of military thing. I will tell you that you're quite right. The military has a mandatory retirement of age 55. The policeman can't shoot as straight, he can't run as fast, and all the things go with it. You might want to consider some of that in your redesign of the program. In terms of the tax issue here, I'm sorry, the $1.7 billion is not a static number. It goes up 7 to 8% each year because you have that obligation to make it. So you might want to consider a sharper knife on that. But the thing about the military...
It can go up if you fund it at what we're funding based on the...
No, it still goes up. You got $1.7 billion. Next year you got 1.9 and so on. Well, that's my understanding. I'm sorry. And then this idea about communicating with the public, that's excellent. Let me suggest a stage building type program as opposed to here it all is on the Sunday paper. I agree you don't want to point out any villains, although there's a villain in it. I would suggest, and this might be useful to you guys, you should, the things we talk about different indexes, what's this city doing, what that city doing, that's how we base our decision. I would suggest putting together a notebook for everybody in here to have that stuff so that when you talk and we in the public know how you came to that conclusion.
We'll do that at the end of the day. This was sort of an interim thing that I
understand.
Right. So your time is up.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Next.
Carnell Oliver, address is 8527 Oak Leaf Road. I want to commend y'all. Y'all have done a great work. And I'm in support of the hybrid plan because I have a few friends that are police officers. And one thing I can say is that with the pension situation where it is now, is that if the media agreement would took place, all the officers that are on the books right now will support it because it doesn't affect them. But if you start tweaking with it now and you try to involve them, they're going to jump out. The hybrid plan is probably the best plan. But now when it comes down to death of an officer in the early beginnings, you need to find that gap to feed that funding gap.
Right.
Then also, we're going to have this budget cycle for the city for 14 and 15 is going to be about taxes. How we going to fund different things? We got too many issues in the city. And I personally believe maybe 2, maybe 3 millage rates. One dedicated to our unfunded liability and to a number of other different issues in this city could solve a bunch of problems. My number one priority when it comes to y'all is getting that unfunded liability and also infrastructure and a number of other issues that we need to really be dealing with right now at this very moment. Y'all have done a great job.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public? We are adjourned. Thank you all.